Chapter 1. The Long Road Home. I watched as the miles between my friends and I added up. There was a longing to run back to them, mixed with the excitement of my new life with the family I thought had died 12 years ago. As I relived the past few weeks in my head, I wondered how so much had changed in such a short time. Somehow, I had gone from an orphan with no friends to having my parents back, a girlfriend, a best friend, and the closest thing to a big brother. Mix in that I'm part witch and part werewolf, and it would leave even the sanest person's head whirling. As I spun around in my seat, I rested the back of my head on the headrest and glanced around the van at the mishmash of people crammed in it, but couldn't help but experience a void where my aunt and uncle should be. Although they had set into motion 12 years of pain and suffering for my family, they had been the only parents I had known, and their not being here was bittersweet. "You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, kid," George Barlow said from a few seats in front of me, jarring me back to reality. Not knowing exactly how to answer, I shrugged as I resumed my diligent scenery watching. Next to me, and taking up the rest of the bench, was my German Shepherd buddy, who lifted his head momentarily to examine me. Content that I was not in imminent danger, he dropped it before rolling onto his back, kicking into me and shoving me tighter into the farthest end of the seat. "Take all the space you need," I teased as I rubbed his belly, hearing a small grunt and long exhale. "You want to move?" my father asked, as the corner of his lip lifted, seeing Buddy's position. "Nah, it's okay. He'll likely just follow me to that row," I said. An awkward silence fell over the van again, as the adults slowly turned back in their seats. Everyone except for a large male with long auburn hair and matching beard. Not wanting to acknowledge Kelly's stares, I shifted awkwardly in the seat, which earned a series of grunts from Buddy as he tried to maintain his position. I met Kelly's green eyes, which seemed full of concern, leaving me squirming in my seat. "You miss them. You've got a great pack, and I know you'll see them again." My eyebrows rose as I stared at him, somewhat dumbfounded. Although I had limited time with him, I had never taken Kelly for a sensitive soul. Based on my initial encounter, he came across as more of the act now, think later type, and the thinking part seemed to be optional most of the time. This go-get-em attitude had led him and one of his den mates to falsely imprison my friends and me. With a quick shrug, he turned back in his seat as he added, "Plus, you have that whole mind link thing with them going for you." Still somewhat shocked, I almost missed his subtle nudge to connect with my friends. Although I'm still not sure how I had done it, I'd accidentally created a bond with them after being kidnapped, allowing us to communicate telepathically. A smile tickled the corner of my mouth as I turned inward, searching for those bonds that helped to rebalance me when life seemed off. In my mind's eye, I saw our connections as different colors that protruded from my chest, with each color representing a different person. The thick cords represented my parents, with a warm goldenrod symbolizing both my fathers, while a deep lavender stood for my mother. My friends' cords were thinner and varied in color, usually based on their current mood. Regardless, they always seemed to glow brightly, like beacons calling out to me. Allowing myself to drift inward, I sensed the warmth of white run up my legs as it enveloped my body. Instantly, I relaxed as I watched the three cords beaming brightly. Picking up each tether, the energy from them gave me a sense of peace, knowing they were all safe. I lingered on the tether that glowed with a pale pink hue, knowing it was Izzy. Still unsure if they were aware of when I checked, I let go and pulled back to reality. As I opened my eyes, I saw all the faces in the van watching me. "Are they still there?" my mother asked with a smile on her face. As the heat filled my cheeks, I tried to force a smile back, unsuccessfully. "They won't forget you, especially after all you've been through," she added. "I promise you we'll see them again. We just need to make sure you're safe first," my father added. Nodding, I dropped my head back again as I turned to the window. I didn't want to be this person, but I had my life turned upside down worse than ever before. It was like someone had placed everything in a giant mixing bowl at high speed and dropped various parts of it into different bowls with no regard for its consistency or evenness. Everything that had made sense for the past 12 years was now wrong, and trying to reconcile it in my brain had become more difficult than I thought it would be. "We're almost at Millstone Landing," Mitchell announced from the front seat. Buddy jumped to attention next to me as he tried to pace in the tight space. "Good timing. Looks like someone needs a potty break back there, my father teased, while Buddy gave a small yip in agreement. As we pulled up to the large wooden structure, the size of it took me aback again. Although their pack referred to it as a cabin, the structure was far from that. The front of the building was massive, encompassing 3 stories with a large covered area for guests to arrive under an oversized awning that rose 2 stories high. Suspended in the center hung a large antler chandelier, which I had missed the first time they forced me into the house. The front of the house contained 2 massive doors with intricate designs carved into them. No longer fearing for my safety, I could now fully appreciate them. The left door held a scene of wolves running in the forefront through a wooded area that extended across to the right door. This door contained a road that wound in an upward design, ending toward the top with a howling wolf on its apex and a full moon surrounding it. Millstone Landing gave the sense of entering a 5-star man cave resort. Large stairs flanked the foyer on either side, curving upward to a hidden landing above us. Just beyond was a large sitting room, which held multiple oversized leather chairs facing an enormous stone fireplace and theater system. Past the sitting area was a floor-to-ceiling window that opened out onto the mountainside scenery. Drawn to it, I took in the expansive view of the brilliant fall colors, speckling the majestic mountainside. I can watch this view all day. A voice spoke up from behind me, causing me to jump slightly. Next to me, George was staring out at the scenery, avoiding eye contact. It's even more beautiful than the last time I was here, I said. Frowning, George finally glanced over at me before turning back to the view. As he cleared his throat, I noted a hint of red rising along his collar, although it never reached his face. Yes, it was still early in the season and the leaves had not fully changed. I was also a bit more distracted, I teased. George's eyes widened slightly as he turned to me, which caused me to chuckle. I think a more southern welcome is due this time around, George answered as he straightened his shoulders. As long as it doesn't involve the cage and idle threats, anything will be an improvement, I added. No threats this time, and definitely not that room. You're a guest here, my father announced as he grabbed George's shoulder, causing the large man to gulp visibly. Of course. Now let's get you fed and your pup walked, George announced as he dashed to the kitchen, leaving me and my father by the expansive window. How are you doing? I know the last time you were here was not under the best of circumstances, my father asked with concern in his eyes. I'm okay, I said as I looked down the hallway to the room Marcus, Brian, Izzy, and I had all been captives in. I was seeing the house with fresh eyes, without the fear and apprehension attached to it. With another glance down the hall, I felt a pull to see the room where we had spent so many hours waiting for what we thought would be my demise. It was also in that same room we had realized there was a connection between us that had not been there before. Actually, can I see the room again? I asked hesitantly. Are you sure? My father asked, concern etched in his face. A knot grew in my throat as I nodded, before looking back down the hallway. George, is the cage open? My father asked. A panicked George shot his head around the corner of the kitchen and looked almost like a gopher popping its head out, searching for the predator that had been stalking him. Seeing his face caused my father and me to laugh. He just wants to see the room again. No one's going to be locked in. Relief washed across his face as his features relaxed and the color returned. It should be empty and open. I'll have Mitchell go with you. He'll have a spare key if it's needed. George's head disappeared behind the wall, where we picked up the hushed voices of George and Mitchell. Turning back to the view, my whole body relaxed, and for that moment, it was as though I was a normal 15-year-old on a small vacation with my parents, appreciating the warmth of the midday rays blanketing my face and torso. I took in a deep breath and closed my eyes, until the jingling of keys from behind us broke my meditative state. As I turned, I met Mitchell's eyes as he cocked an eyebrow and gave me a crooked smile. Did you forget something in there? He asked. No, I just want to see it with fresh eyes, if that makes sense. Mitchell shrugged as he led us to the room. With a quick twist of the knob, the door clicked and he pushed it open. Standing in the doorway to the last place I spent extended time with my friends, my head seemed to sway as the memories from that night rushed back. Drawing in a deep breath, I steadied myself as I walked in. Along the right wall were 2 full beds, and a worn-out nightstand between them. They had mounted a TV across from the beds, which seemed to be there more for show, since we'd never found a remote for it. I made my way to the window, where we had spent much of that night, trying desperately to see around the van that had brought us to the house. Looking at the wood-paneled walls, I remembered Brian taking in the room's design after Mitchell had explained how it was actually a metal cage, embedded within thick concrete and adorned with dense hardwood to add a decorative touch. To enhance the security, the glass was bulletproof, and the door was lead-lined, containing industrial-grade locks on it. Typically, rogue werewolves spend a night or two here until they calm down. That night, they were still trying to determine which one of us was the threat, so we were all locked in. Scanning the perimeter of the window, I found an indent in the hardwood and ran my hand over it as I remembered the frustration at our situation that had caused me to punch the wall, leaving a crater in its wake. Creating a fist, I matched the indent with my hand and stared at it as I repositioned my fist over and over within the depression, still in shock that I had produced such a blemish on the wood. "You did that?" my father asked. I nodded without turning to him or Mitchell, who was still in the doorway. "That's very impressive. What is this, hickory?" my father asked Mitchell. "Yes, we were going with durable and attractive," Mitchell said as he came to stand next to us. "Looks like he added quite the dent to your collection of scars in here," my dad added as he scanned the wall. As he assessed the damage, Mitchell shot me a glance out of the corner of his eye while he continued his examination. Finally clearing his throat, he turned to walk back to the door. "We fix nothing in this room unless it seems to degrade the integrity of it. These wounds help to let the next inhabitant know that the room is impenetrable, and they're better off just sleeping it off." I nodded as I walked to the bed closest to the window and sat on its edge as I pulled the pillow up to my nose. Breathing in deeply, I could still smell the delicate aroma of vanilla and roses from Izzy's shampoo. I placed the pillow on my lap and hugged it tightly as I rested my chin on it, wishing Izzy was there in its place. I was getting lost in the thought of her when my father gave a quick cough. Standing, I nearly dropped the pillow and fumbled to catch it before placing it back on the bed. Behind me came a small chuckle, and I turned to glare at Mitchell. "How about we go see what George has cooked up for us?" my father suggested, with an understanding expression on his face. Relieved that he helped avoid the awkwardness of the previous few moments, I took any suggestion and ran with it. "I think he made some pan-fried catfish," Mitchell added. Smiling, I followed the duo to the door, turning around once more to take a last glimpse at the room before closing the door, literally and figuratively, on that chapter of my life. In the kitchen, a conglomerate of men surrounded the large wooden table, filling their plates before heading back to the various parts of the house like scurrying bees inside a hive. Near the head of the table sat my mother, leaving the head seat for my father, who took it without question. I chose the seat opposite my mother, as George and Mitchell filled in a few of the surrounding seats, leaving the far end of the table accessible to the men who continually filtered into the room. "So, tell me about Emerald Creek. It has quite the reputation with the para community," George started, attempting to fill the silence. "I don't know about a reputation," my mother answered with a chuckle. "What is the para community, and why does Emerald Creek have a reputation there?" I asked. "Para is what many paranormal beings call themselves. As far as Emerald Creek, it's the only place I know of where most Fae groups are living peacefully in one area," George answered. "They also glamored it to hide from the rest of the humans," Mitchell added enthusiastically, before he regained his rogue facade. "Someone said a human could walk right through it and not even realize they were in the center of town," Kelly added from the doorway. Chuckling, my mother nodded. "Yes, something like that." Listening to the men beam about my future home left me curious to learn more, while I looked at my parents, waiting for a further description. "What does he mean by Fae? Is it all fairies on the land?" I asked nervously, wondering if I should know the terminology. "Fae can refer to all paranormal beings, although most think of the fairy folk alone when they use the term," said my father. "So then I am part Fae?" It felt awkward to think of myself in this new light. "I guess in the broadest of terms, yes, but most identify with their parasite," he continued. "But I have two parasites. Which do I consider myself?" There was a pause in the room as everyone seemed to contemplate my question. "Both. There's no need for you to choose one. You are unique and should embrace both sides of who you are," my mother chimed in. "So, what is it like there? Emerald Creek?" I asked. "It's a rather large community now, with different groups scattered throughout. Initially, it comprised just Deegan, your father, and me. But over the years, we gained many lone wolves looking for a place to call their own. Although your father never forced a pack mentality on them, it eventually formed naturally and has flourished. After many years of being a wolf pack, we had a large bear community request to join us when their leader stumbled upon our encampment, she continued. My father chuckled, saying Carl was so confused until he realized your mother had hidden us behind a cloaking spell. He smelled and sensed us, but could never find where we were. How did he get in then? We sensed them too. Deegan had been watching from afar and eventually approached them. After talking to Carl, we realized they needed a place to settle down off the grid. We invited his group to join us and discussed the specifics of their stay in Emerald Creek. They've been there ever since, my father explained. You actually played a vital role in helping us come to an agreement, my mother added. Me? How old could I have been? Just shy of your 3rd birthday, she noted with a smile. You seemed to sense the tension in the house and continually kept entering the office. Initially, we would try to send you out, but you kept sneaking back in. Although you said nothing, you kept trying to crawl into Carl's lap. He finally rewarded your persistence when he succumbed to your tiny demand. Without hesitation, you scrambled up and positioned yourself on his legs and leaned forward onto his chest, grabbing his face with your little hands. Initially, you just stared at him, but eventually you started mushing his face around, as though trying to find it under the beard. My father said with a chuckle. What was I trying to find? We never figured it out. Carl thought his beard fascinated you, but it may have been his scent. Being a bear, he smelled different from the rest of us in the creek until that point, my mother answered. Imagining the younger version of myself assaulting the large bear leader caused me to laugh, and I felt a kindredship forming with this mysterious land. The thought caused me to pause. This was not a strange new place. Emerald Creek is where I came from. It was my home, my actual home. But just as quickly as my heart lifted, the thought of my aunt and uncle flashed in my head, and my heart sank. They were the reason I no longer remembered this place, causing anger to bubble to the surface as I considered all my parents and I had missed out on. You feeling all right, kid? George asked uneasily. The large man, who could have doubled as the brawny paper towel mascot, was nervously shifting his attention from me to the light fixture above us, which was now swaying slightly. The last time you got upset, I wound up upside down before being dropped on my head. Remembering the image, I calmed myself and smiled at the two men before I stood to slow the orbit of the chandelier. I was afraid for myself and my friends that night. I thought you were going to hurt us. To be honest, I didn't realize I could manipulate the wind like that until then. I'm sorry I hurt you, but I would do it again if I were in the same position. I'll remember that, George answered with a slow nod as he glanced back at the now motionless chandelier. So, what other groups are in Emerald Creek? I asked, trying to normalize the tension in the room again. I'm losing track. Let me think. We have witches and a multitude of werefolk, including bears, wolves, tigers, a jaguar, hyenas, and a few foxes. A recent migration of elves joined, and there are also a few types of fairies, mostly astral and solarian. A surge of electricity ran through me, at the recollection of the fairy types being the same ones as my aunt and uncle. Before we had separated, they revealed that my aunt had been an astral, or moon fairy, and my uncle a solarian, or sun fairy. Their species each prefer different parts of the day, but they had defied the odds and spent the better part of a century as a mated pair. Like Uncle Roman and Aunt Cora, I announced, instantly regretting using the names I had grown to know them by. Next to me, I noticed the muscle in my father's cheek clench repeatedly as he gripped his hands into fists before releasing them. I mean Nick and Sophia, I corrected as my shoulders dropped. Prior to being kidnapped, Nick and Sophia had been my parents' best friends. After they took me, we went into hiding and changed all our names. Nick became Roman, Sophia became Cora, and I went from Christian to Jace. Since being reunited with my parents, it has been a point of discontent between the three of us. Understandable. They can only see me as Christian, but I know myself as Jace, and don't want to lose that part of who I am. To avoid having to pick a name, everyone has come up with various nicknames for me to avoid having to choose one or the other. My mother, watching both my and her husband's reactions, tried to find a balancing point. Yes, was all she said, before she continued reviewing the inhabitants of the creek. We have many other fairies and I believe pixies, but have lost track of them, as they seem to decide amongst themselves who stays and who goes within their area. They're very private, and most times you won't find them or their homes. To be honest, they'll only reveal themselves if comfortable enough to do so. I sat mesmerized by the multitude of species I'd never known existed prior to a few weeks ago. Would you look at that? The day's getting away and you still have at least 12 hours left on the road. Why don't you stay here tonight and start fresh tomorrow? George suggested. My parents exchanged an uneasy glance before looking at me. Are you okay with that? My father asked. Initially, I felt my back stiffen, which caused my parents to do the same. But seeing their reaction allowed me to reevaluate the request, and I relaxed as I reminded myself that I was a guest. Sure, as long as I have a different room this time, I teased. Absolutely. You can even have my room, George offered nervously. It's a suite with a spare room attached on the top floor, away from the rest of the house. So, you will have privacy. We couldn't put you out like that, my mother answered. Nonsense. To have Luca Volk and his family staying anywhere other than my quarters would be insanity, George retorted. My father's position in the supernatural world still left me in a state of wonder. Although he had not set out to do it, by creating Emerald Creek, he had established an almost godlike persona everyone seemed to be drawn to, but also feared. My mother had explained his need to keep the peace required him to be stern with the rules and regulations of the creek. This visage seemed to have spilled over to those outside the community as well, judging by the actions of the Millstone Landing pack. Kelly, can you grab their bags and bring them upstairs? George asked. Kelly jumped to attention, as though someone had shot him in the rear, and he quickly disappeared behind the wall to retrieve our stuff from the van, while we made our way to our new accommodations. When George had said his quarters were private, he wasn't kidding. The main room encompassed most of the third floor, and had very large wooden planks along the walls and vaulted ceilings, with the wood beams exposed for an added effect. In the center of the far wall stood an enormous king-size bed, with a large chandelier made of antlers hanging above it. Chuckling, I wondered if George had received a deal on them, since they seemed to be repeated so often throughout the house. On the wall opposite the bed was an immense window that extended from the floor nearly to the ceiling. There was an ornate detailing of stained glass at its apex, which cast a whimsical light show that danced across the floor as the sun began its slow descent. The decor was in tones of deep burgundies and rich greens, and seemed to match the flannel shirts George liked to wear. Across from the bed was a large river rock wall, with a built-in fireplace that looked through to a room on the other side. The last time I was in this room, I had been exhausted and still in shock, at seeing my parents for the first time, and had missed that. Crouching down, I tried to peer through the opening of the fireplace where I could see another room. To the right of the fireplace was a set of double barn doors that opened to the bathroom. Inside, they replicated the river rock along a wall that extended from the ceiling to the floor with a large clawfoot bathtub positioned atop it. The most impressive feature was the waterfall, which emptied somewhere behind the tub. As I did the last time I was in this room, I tried unsuccessfully to search under the tub to determine where the water was draining to. A large skylight encompassed a major part of the room and bathed the room in the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. Next to the tub was a glass enclosure with multiple spigots extending out of various positions from the remaining 3 walls. Moving past the tub, George walked through a second door, which opened to the room I had seen beyond the fireplace. They decorated it similarly to the main room, but it seemed to act more like an office than a bedroom. In the far corner stood a massive bookcase with a large extension desk that appeared to be made of mahogany. Positioned behind the desk sat a large executive wingback rolling chair in deep burgundy leather. Opposite the desk was a huge window with a seat nestled within, overlooking the back of the house. Along the posterior wall was a queen-size bed, with a billowing comforter and a patchwork of delicate browns and greens, and a plethora of pillows atop it. Allowing my inner child to come to life, I walked over to the bed and turned, dropping backwards onto it as the mattress melted around me. Almost immediately, the tug of sleep hit as I tried to stifle a yawn. Looks like you need a nap, if not a good night's sleep, my mother teased as she watched. The bed is so comfortable, it's hard not to want to fall asleep immediately. Following my lead, my mother turned and dropped back next to me, letting out a small sigh as she sank into the bedding as well. I hope our bed is as comfortable, she teased George. It's even better, he proudly chimed in. Is there anything you need? My father asked me as he extended a hand to help my mother up. Lying there, I took a quick whiff of my shirt and winced. As I sat up, I looked to the bathroom and remembered the amazing infinity shower and smiled. I think I'm gonna clean up before I lay down, if that's all right. Mi casa es you casa, George stated incorrectly, causing me to cringe slightly. Smiling, I wanted to correct him, but decided against it. I then imagined Izzy's mom wide-eyed at both the incorrect verbiage and accent, and let out a small chortle. After my parents left, I walked into the bathroom and found a fresh towel and toiletries on the vanity. Undressing, I made my way to the shower and examined the sea of knobs, while I tried to remember how George had shown me to use it the last time I was here. With some tinkering, I successfully turned on the shower and basked in the gentle warmth of the water as it rushed over my skin, allowing the events of the past few weeks to wash away. Once back in my room, I snuggled into the bedding as I stared up at the wooden beams above, while a smile crept across my face. Rolling over, I stared out the window at the magical fall scene outside and wondered what my friends would say if they knew my current location. Then I remembered I could talk to them and felt a rush of excitement fill me. Rolling onto my back, I allowed myself to sink into my cocoon of white. At the center of my chest, the tendrils of light in brilliant blue, green, and pink pulsated, as though they were calling me. Cautiously, I tugged on them, like I was ringing an internal doorbell while I waited for a response. "Hey, Jace, long time no hear. What has it been, 5 hours?" Marcus teased. "Something like that. I thought you guys would enjoy hearing where we stopped to stay the night," I baited. "Oh no, you're not back at Millstone, are you?" Izzy asked in a panicked voice. Smiling, I answered, "Yes, but this time I'm in a suite next door to my parents." "I hope they're treating you better than the last time we were there. Hospitality's definitely not their strong suit," Brian answered in a mildly irritated tone. "Well, it was after they realized whose kid you were," Marcus teased. "Definitely better than the last time. They fed me and only caused me to bring forth one small windstorm." "Oh, great. I'm glad they're keeping to their roots. How bad did you leave the house?" Marcus asked. "Firmly planted on its foundation. Only the chandelier swayed slightly," I joked. "What are you guys up to?" I asked. Izzy giggled. "Right now, I'm watching Brian trying to look as natural as Zoe's staring at him." "Of course you would think this is funny. I'm surprised you haven't figured out how to loop your sister into our mental conversations yet. It would definitely make my life 1,000 times easier," Brian announced. "How are your families?" I asked. "They don't seem to remember anything that happened. My parents think you moved 2 weeks ago, but are otherwise completely normal," Izzy announced. "My mom and Aunt Lily didn't remember what happened either, but Aunt Lily guessed that there was something amiss when we got back. She cornered me and made me spill the beans about our adventures. We decided not to loop Mom in for now, but having Aunt Lily in on it helps me feeling sane," Marcus answered. "Zoe and Alyssa definitely suspect something's up. They vaguely remember splitting up, but remember nothing after that. I give it hours to days before they tackle one or both of us to find out what's going on," Izzy guessed. "Brian's gone silent. Has Zoe attacked him already?" Marcus teased. "No, but I'm having trouble listening to her and you guys at the same time." Izzy burst out laughing within my head, which brought a smile to my face. "What happened?" I asked. "Zoe just pounced on Brian and has him pinned, demanding he fill her in on what's going on." "You could save me," Brian pleaded. Imagining the petite frame of Zoe, Izzy's older sister, pinning Brian caused me to laugh out loud. Although he outweighed her by at least 100 pounds and had close to a foot on her, Zoe was feisty and would never be the damsel in distress. "And miss this? No way," Izzy chortled. "Ah, man, now I want to watch it. Do you think it'd be weird if I just showed up?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Brian and Izzy answered simultaneously. "Can I please have my brain back? Pretty please, with sugar on top?" Brian pleaded. Now laughing hard enough to earn a stitch in my side, I calmed myself enough to answer. "I'm actually getting ready to lie down anyway. Thanks, guys. I really needed this." "Good night, Jace. You should lock George, Mitchell, and Kelly up in the cage," Marcus suggested. "Tempting, but I think they earn their forgiveness rescuing me from Eobriaria." "Okay, I guess we'll let them slide this time, but remind them of your exceptional powers a few more times, just to keep them on their toes," Marcus added. "I'll think about it. When you get a new phone, give me an actual call, so that we can talk without company," Izzy hinted. The heat in my cheeks grew as I made a mental list to get a new phone as soon as we were in Pennsylvania. "Definitely. I'll let you know when we arrive," I answered. "I'm pretty sure we'll know. You still transmit your emotions pretty well," Marcus reminded me. Whatever had you angry left me in deep water with Zoe when I threw a pillow at her for no reason, Brian answered. Izzy laughed. I had enough brains to go to my room when I sensed it coming. I don't have a room here, remember? Brian retorted. You could have gone out to the garage, Marcus suggested. I don't know what would have been worse, walking away from her mid-kiss or throwing a pillow at her head, Brian said, exasperated. I'm gonna venture a guess that the pillow was a poor choice, Marcus teased. You think? I'm still sporting the red mark on my cheek from it. I'll try to keep my emotions under control for the rest of the night. I'm going to bed now. Talk to y'all tomorrow, I assured them. It's Saturday. Don't connect till at least noon, Marcus chimed in. I won't. I allowed the internal bonds to release as I relaxed and opened my eyes to the warm glow of the fireplace that my parents must have started while I was talking with my friends. Sitting up from my bed, I looked out at the inky sky that was highlighted with the various shades of muted reds, yellows, and oranges down below. I then tried to peer through the fireplace to see where my parents were. Unsure if they were busy or possibly downstairs, I lay back on the bed and closed my eyes, preparing to fall into a hopeful, dreamless sleep, when there was a knock on my door. I opened my eyes and sat up to see my mother peeking her head through the door. Are you going to sleep? She asked shyly. Yes, I was about to close my eyes. Is everything okay? Stepping into the room, she smiled as she approached the bed, sitting next to me. It's been 12 years since I tucked you in. I know you're too old for it, but at least being able to give you a hug before you fall asleep. Her voice trailed off as she looked away. I saw the pain and realized the need in her voice, so I scrunched further into the sheets and stared at her until she met my eyes. What? She asked uncertainly. I'm ready. For what? For you to tuck me in. Her face lit up, and I caught the hint of a tear cross her eye as she gathered the sheets and tucked them in tightly around my arms and legs. Before she stood, she leaned down and kissed my forehead gently. I love you so much. I love you too, Mom. Good night, sweetheart. Turning, I watched her walk toward the bedroom door that separated the two rooms, where my father stood smiling. Good night, Dad, I called to him. Good night, son. Chapter 2. Return of the Lost Child. I woke to the gentle warmth of the sun washing across my face like a tender kiss, warming my whole body. As I opened my eyes, I could just make out the sunrise over the distant hills as it illuminated the rainbow of colors in the foliage below. Sitting up, I noticed the fireplace was no longer glowing and peered through the partition to see my parents' bed was empty and already made. Wiping my face, I stood and prepared for the day before heading down to the main landing of the house. As I opened the door, I caught the wonderful aromas emanating from the kitchen, wafting their way up to the third floor, and felt my stomach growl in anticipation of the feast below. Looking at the bags on the floor, thoughts of the next leg of our adventure settled in. As I moved through the room, there was a surge of excitement, like an electric current had come to life inside me, and I found myself more eager to return to Emerald Creek and fill in the missing gaps of who I was and would become. In the kitchen, they'd set the table much as it had been yesterday, with bodies filtering in and out as they grabbed their meal, only to disappear down various corridors. My parents and George were deep in conversation and had not detected my entering, as I was likely lost in the constant motion of the room. Grabbing a plate, I loaded up on the basics before returning to the seat I had the night before. How did you sleep? George asked with trepidation. Amazing. I don't think I even dreamed, I answered as I stuffed a piece of bacon in my mouth, causing my mother to giggle and George to relax. We are planning on leaving right after breakfast. Daryl is filling the van as we speak, my mother said with a smile. I nodded to her with a mouthful of food, causing her to smile again. We will let you know when we get home and can set up accommodations for you to visit then, my father told George, seeming to answer a conversation I had missed. I'm looking forward to seeing Emerald Creek, and we'll be waiting for your call, George answered. By the time we had completed our meal and made our way to the van, I was ready to resume our adventure without so many people mixed in with us. As we left the driveway, we waved to Millstone Landing and its inhabitants. That was extremely generous of George to let us stay there last night, my mother suggested. It was the least he could do, considering everything that happened the last time we were there, my father noted. Creasing her brows, My mother nodded while she seemed to search my father's face, before turning back to Buddy and me. I have an idea. Let's play a game. We have almost 12 hours before we're home. This will help to pass the time, she started. My father looked at her and I saw his eyebrow lift at her suggestion. You've never been one for car games. What game were you thinking? Sort of like 20 questions. What better way to get to know each other than to ask? She beamed. Smiling, I answered, I'm in. With a slight shake of his head, but a smirk on his face, my father turned in the seat to better see the both of us. How do you want to start? She asked. I guess we should start with the basics and go from there, I suggested. Nodding, she seemed to ponder the first question. Okay, I've got one. What's your favorite color? I'll answer first. Green. My father smiled with a small snort. No, it isn't. I think I would remember my favorite color, she answered indignantly. His smile widened as he observed her before answering. No, your favorite color is closer to a turquoise or a light teal. My mother opened her mouth as though she were about to argue, and closed it as a smile spread across her face. Okay, I guess that is more accurate. Well, smarty pants, yours is red, she countered. Smiling, he turned to me. How about you? She asked. Without hesitation, I blurted out, blue. Any tone, really, but definitely blue. Interesting, and good to know. Maybe we can stop and pick up paint to add some color to your bedroom. Right now, your walls are a stark white, my father said. We didn't know how to decorate it, so we chose a blank canvas for you, my mother continued. How about your favorite season? My mother asked as she spun further in her seat, positioning her arms on the edge of the backrest. I've always had a soft spot for fall, especially in areas where the leaves change, I answered. Your mother and I are both winter people, which is a good thing considering where we live. Comes pretty early and can last well into the spring. What are your favorite treats? I asked. Both seemed to ponder the question for some time before answering. I would have to say cheesecake, my mother answered. My father smiled. You first. Brownies. I could eat a whole batch by myself. I thought you were going to say that. They're mine as well. How would you know I was going to say that? They exchanged uneasy glances before speaking. I heard you think it before you said it. My face slackened from his response, and I understood what people meant by jaw-dropping. What do you mean you heard me think it? Shifting in his seat, he seemed to search for the proper phrasing. Ever since you called out to me in Ia Briaria, I've been picking up on you, talking in my head. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but you've done or said what I heard too many times to discount it. Can you, too? I asked my mother. She shook her head. No, it seems to be only your father. I only pick up on your emotions. Are you sure you can? I asked, half curious, half terrified. There's one way to find out, he said with a slight cock of the eyebrow and a tilt of his head. Challenge accepted, I thought, and waited for his response. My father let out a hearty laugh. Challenge accepted? Really? Again, I felt my jaw drop and could no longer think or speak. How much had he picked up? What had I thought? Waves of panic bubbled to the surface, and I was unsure if I wanted to vomit or wish myself into a coma to prevent my thinking of anything. Easy, he said with his arms partly outstretched as he waved them up and down, trying to calm me. I've been getting pretty good at blocking what I don't want to know or what I don't think you would want me to know. My eyes frantically shifted between my parents as I tried to plan a coherent sentence. Thankfully, they both sat there patiently waiting. Can other werewolves do this? Yes and no, my father started. In times of distress or when we're in wolf form, I can pick up on what they're thinking, but they're sending their thoughts to me. Yours seem to come whether or not you want them to. I felt as though I was at the precipice of a roller coaster, staring down the first large drop, anticipating the momentary freefall and flip in my stomach. My mother grabbed hold of my hands and the small hurricane forming within me slowed to a gentle breeze. This is not a bad thing. You have a unique bond with your father. If I had to guess, you have many unique traits, and we've just barely scratched the surface. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath before opening them again. How much do you get? I asked, somewhat dreading his answer. My father chuckled and his cheeks blanched slightly before the color rose again. You're a typical teenager and your brain is constantly going. I waited, unsure what he was about to tell me, and tasted the bile that had risen in the back of my throat. I can confirm you did not dream last night because it was the first time I could rest and not be on constant guard to block your thoughts, he said with a smirk. That often? I asked in a near whisper. That often, he affirmed. Sitting back against my chair, my brain whirled with a million thoughts at once. Looking up, I met my father's eyes and caught the quirk of his lip, an entertained lift of his eyebrows. Immediately, I tried to make my brain stop, which was more like throwing the emergency brake on a Ferrari going 100 miles an hour. It left me with a pounding headache and a jumble of thoughts. This is part of why we need to be in Emerald Creek, my mother said. We know you have this connection with your father, but we're not sure about anyone else. I want you to have ways to protect yourself while we help you learn all you are capable of, she started. With both of them observing me, waves of panic rushed off me like a tide crashing into a jetty. What are some things you like to do to calm yourself? My mother asked, which momentarily distracted me. Are we playing the game again? I asked as my head continued to spin. Not at the moment, she answered with a chuckle, but it is a good question. Listening to music and playing Castle Core? What is Castle Core? My father asked. It's a video game that allows you to be a mythical character in a fantasy world. Izzy and Marcus also play, and we have a cohort together there. My mother chuckled at my description with a twinkle in her eye. Reading the entertained expression on her face, I had to smile. I guess it sounds like the world I now live in. Maybe just a little, she smiled. What type of character are you in this fantasy world? My father asked. Actually, a wizard. My mother beamed as she made a fist and pulled it in tight, as though her team had just made the game-winning goal. Yes! Seriously, Callista? Maybe a werewolf was not an option, my father argued. Watching their debate made me laugh before I answered, Actually, it is. My father's eyes widened in mock indignation. And you didn't choose it? I wanted something I could hide. My character doesn't even look like a wizard. Most people mistake me for a regular human or a bounty hunter. Why did you choose to be hidden? My mother asked. A frown crossed my face as my jovial mood departed like a flock of birds leaving their nest. It was closer to what I was like in real life. Because of all the moves, I never really made friends, and when I tried, I always felt like I didn't belong. I don't think you'll have that problem at Emerald Creek. There are all walks of life there, and none of us fit in with the normals, my mother answered reassuringly. I used to be normal, was all I could think as I petted Buddy, who was sprawled widely across the back seat and somewhat crushing me in the corner again. As the thought crossed my mind, I winced as I glanced up to meet my father's face, which was etched with concern at having heard my thought. It's okay to be angry about all of it. This was not the life we intended for you, but we'll try to bring normalcy where it is possible, he said, as he tried to give me a reassuring smile. Normalcy? I don't think I ever had it. My avatar in the game mirrored my own life without me realizing it. I was hiding in plain sight. Most didn't know what I was and left me alone. The occasional creature that figured it out put little credence in my abilities and just passed me by. It helped me to survive and thrive in the game, because they always underestimated my powers. A smile crept across my father's face. I think most people will learn quickly that you're a force to be reckoned with. But until that point, we need to help you cultivate those skills. Spinning around in her seat, my mother called up to Daryl. Where are we now? About midway through North Carolina. We have quite a way to go, my mother sighed. Smiling, I watched as the foliage on the trees seemed to adopt the color scheme of fall the further north we drove. I leaned my head back against the headrest as the weight of my eyelids increased. Not wanting to be rude, I shot up in my seat and opened my eyes wide to my mother, smiling empathetically at me. Sweetheart, you're tired. Close your eyes. It will also help to pass the time. But your game, I argued. We have the rest of our lives to get to know all the details about each other. Rest now. With my head resting back, the monotonous scene of trees intermingled with the occasional sign lulled me into a peaceful sleep. The only thing to wake me up was a stillness in the van and Buddy's wet nose nudging my cheek. As I opened my eyes, I saw that I was nose to snout with Buddy, who was giving a low whine as he paced in the back seat. What's up, boy? I asked with a stretch as I looked around. We had stopped at a gas station, but my parents and Daryl were nowhere in sight. They must be inside, I reasoned with Buddy. Sitting attentively on the seat, he anxiously offered his paw, with the occasional whine, causing me to smile. Nature's calling that strong, huh? Okay, let's go for a walk, I suggested, causing my overgrown fur ball to bounce around in the back seat as I fought to clip his leash on. As I opened the doors to the van, a blast of Arctic air slammed into me, sending a deep chill through my body. I pulled my coat tighter and glanced back at Buddy, who seemed to assess the temperature as well before he barreled out of the van, racing toward the patch of grass next to the building. Gripping the leash tighter to prevent him from breaking loose, I was half dragged across the lot to his desired destination. I arched my back, trying to loosen the muscles as I inspected the clearing, and took in the mid-afternoon rays, basking in the warmth it provided between the gusts of icy wind. Feel like stretching your legs? I asked Buddy, who turned and cocked his head to the side at the question. Walking around the perimeter of the building, I noted the cars flying past the centrally placed rest stop, and I wondered where we were. Toward the front of the building, I noted many motorists moving in and out of the store, while others shivered at the pumps. As we moved toward the back of the building, I saw that the movement had slowed and seemed to disperse until it was just Buddy and me walking through a somewhat deserted part of the lot. At its back edge was a large patch of trees that were densely packed, making it difficult to see within. As we passed, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, which caused me to stop my forward movement. Buddy seemed to sense it as well and stopped, looking into the brush and emitting a low growl. I glanced at the front of the building but could no longer see the van, while the crowds of people looked more like small ants running in various directions. Next to me, Buddy's growl intensified as his posture dropped into a defensive one, causing me to turn back to the wooded area. I swallowed hard as I leaned forward, trying to make out what we were sensing. Help! I heard a faint female voice calling from the brush, causing me to shoot to attention, unsure if I'd heard something or not. I found myself uncertain which direction to move, and glanced over my shoulder again, hoping to see my parents. Next to me, Buddy's haunches raised as he bared his teeth. I was unsure how to interpret my dog's behavior, considering that someone was calling out for us. I tried to calm him again as I looked deeper into the brush, trying to determine who had beckoned when I heard it again. Jace, please help me. This time the voice was very clear and sounded like Izzy. I stopped suddenly and looked at Buddy, whose opinion on the voice had not changed. Hello? Who's there? I hollered into the brush as I moved closer, although Buddy was furiously pulling back on the leash. Come on, boy. Someone needs us. I tried to reason with him. Help me! Jace, I'm trapped! The voice spoke again. I stared into the tree line, perplexed by what could have trapped them when I felt my head sway, leaving me feeling dizzy. Grasping at my temples, I tried to balance myself as I looked deeper into the wooded area, which seemed to create a tunnel effect straight toward a central point I could not make out yet. Where are you? I asked as I squinted, feeling like I was on a boat caught in a turbulent sea. You're almost at me. Just a little closer, the voice urged. It was around this time that the world around me seemed to stop its movement, leaving me and the being in the bushes in a world unto ourselves. Although I could sense Buddy next to me, I was no longer aware of what he was doing. Whatever was in there seemed to have taken control of my legs as I marched forward. I knew as I proceeded, I should not continue toward the tree line, but could not stop myself. I continued my advance, sensing the bile rise in my throat at the loss of my body's control. As I reached the edge of the wooded area, my arm extended as a pair of eyes began glowing like two fireflies suspended in midair. Transfixed by its appearance, I watched as they swayed back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm, calling me to them, although it was no longer speaking. Behind them I could hear movement and wondered if there were more in the woods, or if it was just the set of eyes dancing for me. Continuing to watch, I felt a peace coming over me, as though everything would be better if I would just move closer. Around us, the world had dissolved away, and my desire was only for the glowing orbs in front of me. I needed to touch its face and brush away the darkness that was covering it. The eyes were so beautiful, like two emerald gems cascading a brilliant shower of green out and around it. With an overwhelming need to see the face behind the eyes, I reached my hand out. Yes, that's it, the voice said in a near hiss, which seemed odd, although not enough to stop me. I reached my hand out and lifted my leg, about to take an irrevocable step into the unknown. Instantly, there was a searing white-hot pain in my calf that caused me to break out of my trance as I turned to look at my leg. In front of me, there was a loud sound, like a mix between a scream and a hiss, followed by the breaking of branches as the trees shifted where something large traversed through it. Still somewhat stunned by the previous occurrence, I stood there dumbfounded until I heard Buddy whimpering. Next to me, he was cowering, ashamed at having bit me. It instantly replaced anything that had occurred, with my only need being to comfort my friend, who had just saved me from whatever had just tried to lure me to an uncertain doom. Bending down, I gingerly extended my hand to his still lowered head. Cautiously, he lifted it as his tail began slowly wagging. "It's okay, boy. I know why you did it. Thank you." Realizing I appreciated his actions, he lifted his head fully and bounded to me, covering my face with kisses, which caused me to laugh. As I stood, there was a fiery pain in my leg, which caused me to suck in wind as I grabbed at it. "You got quite the bite, big guy," I teased as I petted him, seeing his apprehension returning at my posture. With a glance back into the woods, Buddy snorted before pulling on the leash toward the front of the building, where my parents were standing holding grocery bags, looking around with concern on their faces. As we got closer, my father's head spun around. Meeting my eyes, I noticed his nostrils flare before he ran toward me, Daryl close behind, searching for whatever had put my father on high alert. "What happened?" he asked in a concerned tone as he looked me over, causing my mother to shift her attention between us. "I'm not sure, but Buddy saved me," I replied as I motioned to my leg. My dad regarded my leg before he looked back in the direction we had just come from, his nostrils flaring again. With a quick flick of his head toward the van, he placed his hand behind my back, almost shoving me toward the van, as he continued looking over his shoulder. "Okay, let's get going." "What's going on?" my mother asked, panic rising in her voice. "Let's get in the van first," he said as he ushered us in and nodded to Daryl, who returned to the driver's seat and engaged the engine. Once we were all inside, my father closed the doors. "Get us out of here, now." There was a sinking sensation in my chest as I looked back at the tree-lined area, leaving me wondering what I had just escaped from. As we passed, the large deciduous trees shook violently as something moved below, causing a cascade of rainbow leaves to fall from their branches. "What is that?" my mother asked. "Based on the smell, the movement, and the size, I think it was a serpent of some sort. Did you see it?" my father asked. I stared at the movement of the trees with mixed fascination and horror. "I only saw its eyes. They were glowing and seemed to hover without a body." "Dracaena?" my mother suggested as her eyes widened. "What is a dracaena?" "It's a half-serpent, half-female creature that lures its victims to it before killing them. They prefer witches, as it charges them," my father answered. My body spasmed from the memory as I leaned down to pet Buddy. "How bad is your leg?" my father asked as he tried to push past Buddy to better examine it. "Please don't be mad at him. If he hadn't, I don't know what would have happened." My father's features relaxed as he leaned down to pet Buddy, placing his forehead against my dog's. "On the contrary, he's getting steak tonight for what he did." "If that was a dracaena, they don't give up easily," my mother said as she scanned the wooded area next to us. "Do we have enough gas to get us back to Emerald Creek without stopping again?" my father asked. Daryl shifted in his seat, examining each of the gauges. "Yeah, we should have enough. As long as we don't hit traffic, I think we should be there within the next 2 hours. Letting out the breath I had not realized I'd been holding, I leaned back in the chair, lifting the torn pant leg to give my father better access to it. I winced and sucked in air while I bit down on my fist, as a jab of white-hot pain shot into my calf. My mother knitted her eyebrows as she leaned over the seat to get a better look at my leg. Blood soaked through the bottom of the pants in a dark maroon starburst pattern, while small trails of blood pooled on the floor. "You have quite a bite, pup," my father teased Buddy, who dropped his head and started whining again, before trying to lick up the mess his bite had caused. "It's okay, boy. We'll do the cleaning," my father said, as he patted Buddy on the head, while gently nudging him away from my leg. Upon lifting my pant leg up higher, we saw that the extent of the damage was even more startling. Where I expected one set of teeth marks, there were multiple. My dog had bitten me multiple times trying to save me, and in the end ripped backwards on my leg, tearing the skin and into the muscle. Looking at the wound, the color on my father's face blanched momentarily. "It seems he was very intent on getting your attention. I'm going to draw on the pack to help heal this. Are you okay with that?" "The pack? But I'm not part of the pack. How will that work? I asked as an intense wave of pain shot up my leg, leaving me feeling weak and nauseated. You are part of the pack because you're my son. Now try to relax. My father grasped my leg above and below the wound. There was initially nothing, but soon I sensed a retreating sensation, as though a magnet were pulling the pain back to rest between his hands. As my body relaxed, I chanced to glance at my leg, and watched in a state of awe as the area seemed to glow and reduce in its intensity. Crouched close to the injury, my father had an intensity to him, which I tried to avoid interrupting. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and wiped away the beads of sweat that had formed across his forehead. Slightly out of breath and appearing quite fatigued, he looked from my mother to me. How do you feel now? With a cautious flex of my foot, I expected the same excruciating pain, but found only a dull ache. That was amazing. Barely hurts anymore. Good. I'm going to sit back up by your mother, okay? Seeing the strength my father had always exuded replaced by this weakened state left me confused and with a sense of guilt. As he stood, I noticed the limp that he had not had beforehand, and I grabbed at his arm. What did you do? I asked. With a chuckle, he continued to move to his previous seat. What I could to protect you. But you didn't heal it. You took it on yourself. Not exactly. I shared it, but took the majority. That's how we help each other heal faster. By the time we get to the creek, I will have healed. You likely would have taken longer on your own, and I didn't want to chance it. Who did you share it with? I asked in a shy voice, scared that my injury was going to drop half the wolf pack before I even arrived. With Deegan and Gavin. They're the next two in command, and are used to sharing this type of burden. By sharing it, one person does not have to take it all on themselves. You did it for your friends as well, my mother reminded me. What I did for them was different. I didn't take their pain, I gave them what they needed, and it didn't leave me drained. If anything, I felt energized afterward. My father stared at me in a state of confusion. I've never known someone to be able to do that. There's always a cost, he said. I don't know about others, but I know that's not what happened to me. Watching the beads of sweat pooling on his forehead, a pit formed in my gut, knowing that he was experiencing it because of me. My mind drifted, wondering if it would even be possible to help him. I'm honestly trying not to listen in on your thoughts, but you're so fervently thinking them I'm struggling to block you. Besides, I don't know if it would work, my father answered. What won't work? My mother asked as her head ping-ponged back and forth, taking us both in. He wants to give me his strength and health like he did with the kids. Well, looking at you right now, it can't hurt, she said. Her eyes narrowed, and the fine lines of her face seemed to be stressed the longer she took in her husband. Studying her face, my father brushed a hand across her cheek before turning to look at me and nodded. As I crouched in front of him, I tried to remember what I had done with my friends. I offered what they needed at the moment, I reminded myself. Closing my eyes, I grasped his hands and allowed my body to relax. As was the same whenever my magical side came to life, a warmth washed up my body as it cocooned me in a veil of white. My father's hand was still large in mine, with a rough, callous texture and weight to it that was surprising. Calming my thoughts, I tried to imagine what he needed to be whole again. My magic appears to me as colors, and as I imagined the health my father required, I could see a warm blue beam starting from my core before it traveled down my arm toward his. As the ray met his fingers, he pulled back slightly before relaxing his grip, allowing the color to continue to penetrate his skin. At the completion, the light streamed back up my arm, settling in my chest. Once convinced that he needed nothing else, I opened my eyes to see both my parents staring at me wide-eyed. How do you feel, both of you? My mother asked. Turning inward, I examined my inner self and noted the same sensation I had after helping Marcus, Izzy, and Brian a few weeks ago. Great, I answered as I watched my father for his assessment. Shifting his leg out, he pulled up his pant leg to reveal an unblemished calf. As the material fell back to the floor, I saw the same maroon starburst on his pant leg that matched mine. He opened his mouth as though he were about to speak, although nothing came out. Now that's a first. I don't think anyone has ever left your father speechless, my mother noted. I'm not speechless, just in shock. Over the years, you build up injuries that lead to daily aches and pains that you just grow accustomed to. I feel none of them. Staring, he seemed to scrutinize me, like he was trying to determine where he missed the sleight of hand. I'm not lying, I said with a chuckle. I really do feel great. That was amazing to watch. You could actually see it happening, my mother said. You've never seen someone do that before? I asked. To be honest, I'm still learning myself, and have not seen everything that's possible with magic. But of what I have seen, that is a definite first. And that it doesn't drain you? Amazing, my father added, as he turned his hand over in front of him, examining it. Warmth filtered through my body as though the sun was incorporating itself into every cell, and I relaxed into the sensation, hoping my friends in Florida were experiencing the high as well. As I leaned back in the seat, I watched the world outside our little bubble passing us by. Next to the van was a small hatchback with a young family inside. In the back seat was a small, dark-haired girl with thick braids and multiple colored barrettes, scattered throughout, creating a rainbow crown. Although the windows of our van were thickly tinted, she seemed to see through it, and waved her tiny fist from the car seat she was buckled into. Watching her beaming face, I smiled and waved back until the gap between the vehicles increased, and I lost her in the sea of cars on the road. Returning to the tree line, I remembered the Dracaena before thinking back to the small child, and felt a jolt of anxiety run through me. "We have to go back to the rest stop," I exclaimed as I sprang up from my seat, causing my parents to jump and Daryl to swerve. "What? Why?" my mother asked in a panicked tone. "The Dracaena. There's nothing to stop it from taking someone else. We can at least fight back against it." As I watched my parents exchange uneasy glances, I felt the need to drag the van back to the spot we had last seen the beast intensify. "If it was a Dracaena, they feed on supernatural beings. The younger the better. Going back would be suicide for you. We can alert local packs about what we saw in the area when we get home, but you cannot go back there," my father announced. Turning in my seat, I searched for any signs of movement until I felt a hand on my arm. My mother's eyes were a warm blue, like the brilliant waters of the Caribbean, and I felt a calming sensation come over me at her touch. "It's obvious you'll be an amazing leader and protector of those that cannot protect themselves. But before you can do that, we need to make sure you can protect yourself." As I searched her face, I felt the gentle swerve of the van as it veered onto the exit ramp, causing my parents to turn and look at where we were as well. "We're about 15 minutes away," Daryl announced. My insides seemed to flip, and my mouth went dry as I gripped the arms of the seat. After 12 years, I was about to rejoin the community I had left so abruptly. My emotions roiled as I tried to imagine what it would be like when we arrived. Would anyone meet us, or would we simply go to our house unnoticed? My mind flooded with 1,000 questions as my stomach dropped further with each. My mother touched my hand, which caused me to meet her soft eyes. As though she cast a spell, the hammering in my chest slowed, and my breathing calmed. "We're here with you. Everyone has been so excited to have you back," she said as she squeezed my hand. Turning onto a small, nondescript road, I noticed a shimmering effect to the left of the van, and tilted my head, trying to determine what I was seeing. "You can see the ward," my mother answered my unspoken question. "It's in there?" I asked as I strained to see through the diaphanous veil that seemed to flicker and swirl in the sunlight, like 1,000 gemstones were being reflected within it. "Yes, they can see us coming, but until we're through the entrance, you won't be able to see inside," she added. I shifted in my seat to see where the entrance to our hidden society was located, and watched as Daryl turned into what appeared to be a ditch. I caught my breath and closed my eyes as I grabbed my mother's seat back. "It's okay. Open your eyes," she said. Cautiously, I followed her instructions to see a small city where there had been only trees a moment before. As we slowly advanced on a roughly paved road, people from the small houses that speckled the side of the street filtered out. At first, it was only a few, but quickly the entire creek seemed to have heard, and they were all running toward the van, cheering as though a celebrity were inside. I met my mother's eyes, which were misted over as she took in the surrounding sight. "Are you still nervous?" she asked as she choked back a tear. I sat wide-eyed at the throng of bodies accumulating around the van, so closely that Daryl was forced to stop. "I guess we're getting out here," my father chuckled. Turning back to me, he smiled brightly. "Are you ready to meet your family?" Gulping, I pulled Buddy close to me as I numbly nodded. Standing at the door on the side of the van, he lifted the lever, and the door swung open to a roar of screams and cheering. Stepping back, my father made room for a large, dark-haired male with a multitude of tattoos to enter. Seeing Deegan, my heart began beating in a more regulated rhythm, while the tension in my back released. He smiled and nodded to me before turning his attention back to my father. I tried to keep it under wraps when you would arrive, so naturally everyone knew. Gavin is holding them back enough for you to make it to the Great Hall. Following his finger, I watched as a sea of bodies parted, allowing access to a large rectangular building that seemed to be positioned in the center of the creek, with a large stone staircase in the front. Compared to the other buildings, which were more modest in design, the Great Hall was large and more modern in appearance, and seemed almost out of place comparatively. Stepping out of the van, Deegan positioned himself next to the door, ready to lend a hand as needed. My father stepped out behind him to another cry of cheers. Holding my hand, my mother guided me to the door and stepped out to another boom of applause. Taking a deep breath and holding onto Buddy's leash, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Outside, there was a sudden silence, as though the creek was holding its breath to be sure I would actually emerge. Bending forward, I stepped onto the steps of the van and lifted my head. With only a second of hesitation, there was a thunderous applause that erupted through the small valley. As I met my parents on the ground, they each grabbed a hand as a large man guided us to the stairs, while Deegan took up the rear. Scanning the faces, I realized there must have been close to 500 bodies, of all sizes, ages, and walks of life that came out to meet us. No, to meet me. As we ascended the stairs, the hero's welcome I was receiving left me humbled. Once at the top landing, we turned and I could fully appreciate the massive gathering in front of us. Next to me, I could feel the energy from my parents as they squeezed my hands. People of Emerald Creek, our son has returned to us, my father announced to another riotous cheer as they lifted my hands in theirs. Within the crowd, a small chant started, initially hard to hear, but soon gathering in intensity until it was impossible to miss. I listened in awe as this group of people who only knew me as a small boy chanted, "Christian! Christian!" over and over. Overwhelmed by the gesture, I could not speak, as my throat tightened while I fought back the tears. I was home. Finally, home. Chapter 3. Lions, Tigers, and Bears. As we walked back from the makeshift dais, the throngs of bodies parted for us, creating a tunnel, guiding us toward a large house that stood in the distance, that seemed to stand guard over everything below. "That's your new home," my mother said with a smile. To our left and right, the groups of people that flanked the walkway were reaching toward us as though we were returning royalty. Some appeared to even be crying as they attempted to make contact. The spectacle caused my pulse to quicken, along with the sensation of small, jerky movements in my muscles, like every fiber was trying to activate at once. "Are you okay?" my father asked. Reveling from the welcome that I could never have expected, I just stared out at the people surrounding us. I'm just a normal kid. What would cause them to react like this? I thought. My father chuckled as he released my hand and placed it around my shoulder, pulling me closer to him. "Those that knew you held hope for years that we would find you and bring you home. Those that did not know the stories and have grown anxious about our attempts to locate you," my father answered my unspoken question. I stared at him wide-eyed before I remembered our conversation in the van and relaxed. My father, seeing the realization register on my face, smiled and pointed to his head. Nodding, I returned my attention to the house on the hill and watched as it grew closer and larger. "Did you take pointers from Millstone Landing?" I asked, pointing to the house. My mother chuckled. "They probably took pointers from us." The house was a large wood cabin design, although not as ornate in detailing as Millstone Landing. There was a large wraparound porch with a swing swaying in the late fall breeze. The oversized steps revealed a warmth to this house that had been lacking at Millstone, leaving it feeling more like a home than a fancy resort. On either side of the door were bushels of hay, with a grouping of fall decor, including mums, squashes, and pumpkins of various sizes, creating an effect that could rival any home magazine cover. Bending forward, my mother examined the clumping and gasped slightly before she straightened to look at us, revealing the misting of tears in her eyes. Glancing down at what had caused a reaction, I noticed 3 pumpkins of various sizes nestled within the fall decor, with silhouettes carved intricately into the sides. The larger was of a man with the moon flanking him. Next to it was a slightly smaller pumpkin of a woman with her hands raised, while starbursts erupted from them, shooting out in various directions. Nestled between both was that of a small boy with a wolf sitting to the left, and a similar starburst surrounding him. "Whoa, who carved these?" I asked. My mother wrapped her arm around my waist and squeezed me tightly. "Deegan did." The sophisticated patterns brought to life gave me a new appreciation for Deegan and all his abilities. Could the same man who set fear in all those that know him also have a gentle and artistic side? "You were going to carve pumpkins with him the morning after you disappeared," my mother added, interrupting my thoughts. "He's carved a pumpkin for you every year since, but these are by far his best creations." Still engrossed in the carvings, I did not notice the door open until the chorus of voices echoed out. The cacophony caused me to jump slightly, as I thought all the creek had been outside and behind us. In the center of the room stood a large man with salt and pepper hair and matching goatee, with dark chocolate eyes, wearing a large toothy smile as he appeared to fight back tears. "You are a sight for sore eyes, son," the man spoke as he bounded toward me, dwarfing me as he got closer. Grabbing me around the shoulders, the mammoth of a man pulled me in tight and squeezed, leaving me slightly gasping for breath. Behind him, a petite woman approached from the side and patted the behemoth on the arm. "Honestly, Carl, let the boy down so he can breathe." He released me and I felt the blood return to my head and upper extremities. With a few deep breaths, I stepped back, positioning myself between my parents, and could hear my father chuckling under his breath. "My God, 12 years. You're not the little runt trying to climb my leg anymore. We're practically eye to eye," Carl announced as he reached out to grab my shoulder. The small woman standing next to him flicked her hip at Carl, causing him to shift exaggeratedly out of the way. "You could ask me to move, woman," he teased. "You wouldn't have listened. Now hush. I need to see this sweet boy again." Stepping somewhat uncomfortably close to me, the small woman reached up toward my face and frowned as she struggled on her toes. I bent down slightly, causing her to smile in response. "You probably don't remember me," she started as she watched me intently for recognition. As I stared into her face, though, it was as though a channel was tuning in, and what was static just a minute ago was now coming in crystal clear. "Trudy, you're Miss Trudy, Carl's wife?" I announced somewhere between a statement and a question. A tear immediately dropped from her eye as she threw her hand over her mouth. Behind me, my father grasped my shoulder, shaking me slightly in appreciation of my recognition. I looked around the room at the rest of its inhabitants and seemed to gain a new focus as the static of my brain retreated and their names and faces fell into place. Pointing to a young man standing behind Carl, I said, "You're Ian, Carl's son." The corner of his lip lifted as he nodded. Searching the rest of the group, I began naming the people one by one and their relationship to each other to their amusement. It's like a curtain is being lifted and my memory is clearing, but I was so young. How could I possibly remember these people like I just saw them yesterday? I asked. My mother's face lit up slightly at the question. "Sophia." "What do you mean?" Her breath caught as she stared back at my father, who nodded in agreement with her assessment. "Sophia could protect memories, and she would place a trigger to allow a person to access them when needed," my mother answered. There was a tug from deep within, as my heart lightened at the thought of Aunt Cora's present to me before it slammed deep in my chest at the realization that I could never thank her for it. Elishore had ensured that when he incinerated her in front of me while holding me captive. Next to me, my father's eyes widened briefly before returning his attention to my mom. Had he picked up on my memory of Aunt Cora's death? Touching my arm, my mother's eyebrows creased deeply as she examined my face. "What's wrong?" Not wanting to bring up my aunt and uncle, I tried to push the emotions down and bring more jovial thoughts to the surface. Fortunately, before someone could question it further, there was a knock on the door, which caused the group to turn in unison. Deegan opened it to find a group of teens and men staring in. My father shifted his posture and motioned for the group to enter. Within minutes, the room filled with roughly 15 more bodies, and I quickly understood the need for such a large house. "Perfect timing," my father boomed before turning to me. "I want you to meet your pack members." Moving as one unit, the group turned and stared at me, sending a shiver down my spine. My father began performing a roll call, and I found the names quickly became a jumble as I tried to keep them straight. A few of the faces were recognizable. Gavin, my father's third, Daryl and Victor, who were driving the vans from Florida, and Deegan. Behind them was a sea of faces, both young and old, but my attention was drawn to a teen slightly older than me, with jet black hair that almost appeared wet against the stark milk tone of his skin. His dark eyes were intense, with his lips pulled into tight cords across his face. Unsure of the reaction, I shifted my gaze away from him and panned the other faces, landing on a different teen with caramel-colored hair and bright hazel eyes sporting an upturn to his lips. Next to him stood an equally tall male, which left me wondering if height was a werewolf prerequisite. The brilliant topaz color of his eyes complemented his mocha skin. He held a relaxed stature, although his features were stern and contemplative, like he was waiting for orders. There was a silence that hung in the air, and I turned to look at my father to discern what had caused it. Just a moment before, he had been so animated and alive, but seemed to struggle with the right words now. Realization hit me like a Mack truck as I waited to hear which name he would choose to announce to his pack. To our pack. With the seconds ticking on, the group in front of us seemed to sense the uneasy energy my father was emitting, and were shifting uncomfortably as well. "This is Jace," my mother finally interjected, as she stepped forward, touching his arm. My head swiveled to look at her, and could sense my father's head had done the same. "Jace?" the angry teen from the back questioned. Clearing her throat, my mother turned to meet my father's eyes, widening hers slightly.
12 years have passed since he was here. Time also brings with it change. We remember him as Christian, but he spent that time knowing his name to be Jace and would like to keep it," my father said matter-of-factly, stopping all challenges. The teen with the caramel-colored hair stepped forward and extended a fist to me. With a lift in my lip, I reciprocated the motion and bumped my fist off his. "My name is Brent." His smile grew as he stepped back into formation, turning to look at the rest of the pack. As his eyes fell on the dark-haired teen, who was scowling in the back corner, Brent dropped his head. What is with this kid? I thought, and noticed my father's shoulders shrug slightly in acknowledgement of my question. "I know you want some time together, but we were wondering if Jace might want to go for a run with some of us later today," one of the other teens named David asked. My father seemed to flinch slightly at the suggestion. "He just got here. I want to spend time with him," I heard my father say, although his lips never moved. My heart raced in my chest as the heat moved to my cheeks. My parents simultaneously looked at me to determine the change. Meeting my dad's eyes, I purposely sent him a mental message, unsure if he would hear it, as I squeezed my mother's hand. "I want to stay here too." His eyes widened slightly as he nodded almost imperceptibly. "Can we meet up tomorrow? I just arrived and want to get settled first," I asked hesitantly. "Yeah, of course. Let me know and I'll come by. I live not too far from here," David answered. Behind David, the dark-haired teen shifted with a scoff, drawing my father's attention. My father cleared his throat before speaking. "Alex, how's the perimeter?" The angry teen stepped forward like a military soldier addressing a superior. With only a momentary glare in my direction, he addressed my father. "Everything's been secure, but we will continue to monitor. No signs of Dracaena or any other beast in the surrounding woods." My body stiffened as I shot a look at my father. "It's precautionary. I doubt it could keep pace with us, but I don't want any surprises," he said.
"Don't worry, we'll keep the borders safe. Nothing's getting past us," Alex said with an air of arrogance, leaving me wondering if it was a jab at my response to the beast. My father frowned.
"I'm sure it is under control. Otherwise, I would not have sent you."
A slight flush rose briefly to the teen's cheeks, and for a moment he looked like a scolded schoolchild. "Unless there's anything else you need, we'll leave you get better acquainted again," Alex suggested with a slight edge in his voice. My father's eyes narrowed slightly, as he seemed to examine the boy's intentions.
"Yes, that will be all. Please help Jace feel comfortable when you see him again,"
my father added, almost as an unspoken threat. Nodding stiffly, the boy turned on his heel, returning to the door. As the rest of the group left, there was a show of respect, but nothing close to the military-like stance exuded by Alex. Returning to our gathered guests, I noticed Carl's brows knitted tight with a slight cock in one, while Trudy was feverishly wringing her hands.
"Well, that was intense," Carl finally said.
"Alex is well-intentioned and a damn fine fighter," my father said to Carl. "He'll warm up to you," he said to me as he grasped my shoulder and guided me into the dining room. Once everyone had sat around the table, Trudy rushed into the kitchen where a cacophony of noises emanated, leaving the room all looking in its direction. Carl rolled his eyes as Ian sported an amused grin. Let me see if Trudy needs any help, my mother nervously said as she rushed into the kitchen.
She made stew for your return and has been eager to have everything ready for when you arrived, Carl said with a warm smile as he glanced into the kitchen. That was very considerate of her. You've both been very generous to our family, my father said. As Trudy and my mother came back into the room, they were carrying bowls and silverware and started placing them out. Without thinking, I stood, which caused the group to stop moving and stare at me. Where are the cups? I asked. Oh my, I didn't grab them yet. Give me a moment, Trudy said as she picked up her pace to lay out the items in her hand. No, I meant where are they so I can help you? I'll bring the drinks in as well. Again, the room went silent as they stared at me like I had just sprouted a third arm from my chest. Thank you, sweetheart. We can get everything, my mother answered with a warm smile on her face. Not taking no for an answer, I continued to walk toward the kitchen. As I passed my mother, I leaned over and gave her a kiss to the cheek. As I cleared the doorway, Trudy was rushing in behind me, trying to block my helping her. My mother, seeing the exchange, tapped Trudy on the shoulder, which seemed to relax her slightly. If he wants to help, I won't argue, my mother said. She pointed out the cabinet that held the cups, and I pulled out the 8 glasses and brought them to the table before returning to bring out any other needed supplies. Once I was sure we had everything properly set on the table, I sat next to my father and glanced up to see him watching me with an amused grin on his face. Looks like times are changing, Luca, Carl teased. It's a pleasant change, my father smiled. Let's dig in, Carl announced as he picked up his spoon and dunked it quickly into the bowl, causing a small amount of soup to escape off to the side of the bowl. I swear, you were raised in a barn sometimes, Carl Foster, Trudy teased. Smiling, I lifted the stew to my mouth, blowing on it before taking a bite. Immediately, my mouth exploded in a tantalizing combination of flavors that caused me to let out a moan of pleasure. This is delicious, I said with a partially full mouth. Trudy's made this stew for years and always brings us some, my mother added. It's nice to have it without remembering that night, Trudy said with a shudder. My father choked slightly on the bite he was eating, and Carl gave Trudy a disapproving look. What night? I asked. Oh, Callista, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. This is a joyous occasion, child. Pay no mind to me, Trudy begged. The room had stilled, and there seemed to be an unspoken air of despair that was riding the edges of the group. The only night that could have brought this group to this state was the night I disappeared. Curiosity grew as I pondered what they had gone through to bring them to a near state of mourning so quickly. Yes, it was the night that you disappeared, my father answered my unspoken question as he dropped his head. You don't have to tell me if it's too painful, I sent the mental thought to him. He squeezed my hand, and there was a rush of adrenaline that ran through me as my brain received a series of flashes from that night. The house I had been born in was a burning pile of rubble, knowing that I was still inside. People trying to put it out using the creek that ran next to the house. My mom needing the fire to stop, lifting the entire creek over the house and flooding it with water, drowning out the flames and anything that was within. The need to wait until the following day to perform the search. My pulse quickened to a near staccato pace as the flash of the female body, burned beyond recognition, was laid under the treehouse. The next scene was more detailed, as though I was reliving it with him. There was a large charred mass on the ground next to the female, with Deegan's shirt covering the top half. The body's getting closer, although I'm unaware of the movement of my legs. Next to me, Deegan yells out for me to stop, but I have no desire to listen to him. My son is under the cloth and I need to see him with my own eyes. Kneeling next to the body, I pull the shirt back and initially cannot make out the 2 figures. As though looking at a magic mirror painting, the image clears, and I can make out the distinct features of each. Nick, who appeared at peace, held the small body of the boy in an eternal embrace. The boy, however, had his head arched back violently, and appeared to be screaming out in pain as he fought to be released. The image caused me to leap back from the table, and the chair to flip behind me. The group at the table stared blankly at me, while Buddy jumped to attention, letting out a yip in response. Trying to calm my breathing and slow my heart, I could not remove the image of the boy, and felt my stomach turn at the memory. Who was it? I asked between gasps of breath and a near whisper. The group stared at me blankly, unaware of the unintentional sharing of that night's events. I met my father's eyes and his features dropped as the realization registered. I didn't mean for you to see that,
he said as he stood to calm me.
What are we missing?
Carl asked. On the way home, we discovered they can speak to each other telepathically, my mother answered. And apparently relive each other's memories, she continued. The room went silent as they seemed to process the last few minutes. That boy, who was he? I asked incredulously. We never found out, my mother said. Where are they now? I asked, unsure why I needed to know.
Buried by the treehouse,
Deegan answered, wide-eyed. I nodded, still fighting to keep the bile from washing up my throat and escaping. The blood pumped savagely through me at the thought of the child's tortured face. How could my aunt and uncle do that to an innocent little boy? There was no justifying taking another's life, but worse than that, taking it in such a violent manner.
Please, come sit with us. I am so sorry you saw that,
my father said with a deep crease between his brows, somehow appearing to age 20 years in the past 5 minutes. Returning the chair to its upright position at the table, I sat and stared blankly at the bowl in front of me with no desire to eat any more. The memory had not only affected me, but acted as a black hole, sucking all the joy out of the room in one swift motion. Pulling herself to an upright position and tapping her hands on the table, my mother's motion brought the table's attention back. This is a joyous occasion. There's so much to show you tomorrow, she said with a new twinkle in her eyes. Feeling the mood in the room lifting, the muscles within my back unraveled, allowing my posture to soften as I listened to her rattle off the locations she wanted me to visit with her. Soon the group was laughing and teasing about times gone by and different antics from others in the creek. While listening to their stories, I remembered sitting at Marcus's house for dinner and listening to similar stories and wishing that I could experience the same with my parents. Sitting around this table now left me with a surreal sensation as I tried to absorb every second, as though it may disappear like a leaf blowing in the wind.
This has been a wonderful day and evening, but I think it's time for us to get back home,
Carl said as he stood from the table.
I hope to see you in bear country,
he said as he pointed his large finger in my direction, with a big smile plastered under his bushy mask of facial hair. What is bear country? I asked.
What is bear country? Well, now you better stop by so I can give you the proper tour. Don't tell your parents, but it's the nicest part of the creek,
he teased as he winked at my mom.
Gavin and I will head out as well and let you have some time alone,
Deegan suggested. My father patted him on the shoulder before pulling him in for a tight embrace, which caused Deegan's eyes to widen before he returned the embrace. Next to them, my mother put her arms around my waist and squeezed, causing me to hug her in return.
If it wasn't for you, we would never have found him,
my father said to Deegan, who stood there, his wide eyes reddened with a fine mist before giving a single nod. Walking to me, he stared deep into my eyes as though they held the answers to life. Reaching out, he grabbed my shoulder as he smiled before he dropped his head to leave. This was the man that never gave up hope he would find me, and made it his life's mission to bring me home. As he started to walk away, I seized his arm. Deegan turned back to me, and I hugged the man who had never forgotten me. As I released him, I watched as his throat bobbed, while he stared at me, before he cupped my cheek, gently patting it. He turned and hurried to the door, where Gavin and the Fosters were waiting. We watched as our guests departed before returning to the sitting room. Grasping my hand, my mother pulled me toward the couch while my father bent down next to the fireplace and added wood before lighting it. The warmth from the flames, coupled with the majestic motion of colors that played within, set off a twinkle of lights throughout the room. He came to sit across from my mother and me, and we all stared at the fire in reverent silence. I allowed my eyes to drift around the room, which had a warmth of an old blanket to it. It was in a style of a craftsman, with large pillars separating the dining room and foyer, with small windows containing stained glass next to the pillars. Exposed wood beams on the ceiling complemented the wood paneling throughout the room. There was a large archway that opened into the foyer that drew the eye to the oversized fireplace, which was made of large earth-toned stones. Above the hearth was a thick piece of wood, with ornate detail carved into it, and perched atop was a structure that held an odd-looking stone, which was dark and in a perfect obelisk shape. Its housing was a large rectangular box made of wood, with 4 panes of glass surrounding it. "What is that?" I asked. Following my glance, my mother smiled. "It's a bloodstone. They were all over this area, but this is the only one that was shaped like this, so we called it the Keystone." "A bloodstone?" I asked, with a hint of concern at its name. These stones bring forth courage, increase your energy, and will reinforce protection of all that you hold valuable. When we found so many of them, we actually started incorporating them into all the houses that were built, she started. That stone holds important value because of its natural shape. When people need added support or help, we give it to them until their luck turns around. Then they return it to us, where we store it here until the next person needs it, she continued. I stared at the stone with a new appreciation of the artifact as a yawn escaped, causing me to cover my mouth.
It's been a busy day. You look exhausted, my father said.
Plus, you haven't seen your room, my mother added. Standing, she grabbed my hand and lifted me from the couch, and we walked to the stairs with my father while Buddy took up the rear. At the top landing, there was a narrow corridor with a series of doors to the left and the right. Many people stay with us, and we need these rooms when they're here. Your room is the one closest to ours, my mother answered my unspoken question to the half-dozen doors to the left of the landing. Turning right, she opened the first door to a large room with a twin-sized captain's bed, a beat-up wooden desk in the corner, and a repurposed Dell laptop placed on top. Above the desk was a corkboard with various pictures and items attached with pins. In the far corner was a large faded brown lazy-boy reclining chair. Seeing it, my breath caught as I took in all my possessions from when I lived with my aunt and uncle. When did you get this here? I asked. After we left to find you in Eobriaria, we had Deegan bring this stuff back home. Do you like it? Walking into the room, I touched the frame of the bed and looked across to the desk, where the corkboard was located. I smiled at the picture attached to the center of Brian, Marcus, and Izzy. Examining the rest of the photos, my breath hitched when I glimpsed my aunt's eyes under a piece of paper. Lifting the sheet, I saw the last family photo I had taken with my aunt and uncle, as a lump formed in my throat. I tried to regain composure of myself before I turned back to see my parents in the doorway, watching my reaction. Thank you, I said in a near whisper, fighting the tears. Walking toward them, I extended my arms and was engulfed in the group hug I had wanted for so many years. Are you going to bed, or are you going to call your friends first? My mother asked. Smiling, I shrugged. I want to talk to them, but I'm not sure if I'll contact them through the game or... I said while I pointed to my head. Don't stay up too late, she said as the smile on her face grew. I've wanted to say that for so long, she mused as my father leaned down and kissed her gently on the top of the head. Good night, he said as he turned to walk out the door, with my mother nestled tightly under his arm. Buddy had already assumed his favorite position, curled up at the foot of my bed as he watched me, waiting for my next move. I stood in the center of the room, trying to deliberate which method I wanted to contact my friends. Deciding that Brian would likely be with Zoe and not appreciate the interference, I opted for my computer. Sitting in the swivel chair at my old desk gave me a sense of normalcy that had been missing since my life changed a few weeks ago. Flipping my laptop open, I listened to it loudly come to life and wondered how much longer it had before it would need to be replaced. With a few movements of the mouse, I clicked on the icon I needed and waited for the program to whirl to life. Relaxing back, I spun around, taking in the room. They set it up almost identical to the way my room in Willitson had been. The only difference was the lazy boy perched in the room's corner, which had been Uncle Roman's favorite chair. Its presence caught me in the same emotional tug-of-war. Part of me wished he would suddenly appear in the chair, while another never wanted to lay eyes on him again, especially remembering the image of the child. With a heavy sigh, I scrubbed my hands across my face, as though it could erase the image burned in my memory. It makes no sense. I can't see how they could do it, was all I could think. Behind me, I heard the familiar tones of the opening screen, and turned to enter my login information. With a few key strikes, Elemental Plaza was visible on the screen, along with a plethora of other players from all over the artificial world. I was interested in 2 specific people, and searched for their avatars. My heart lifted instantly when I noticed Izzy was online. I don't have a phone yet, but this could work, I wrote to her. The telltale bubble appeared in the window, and I let out a deep breath as I waited for her response. Oh, thank God. Your highs have been high and your lows have been very low today. What's going on up there? I seriously wish you hadn't thrown your phone out the window. I chuckled, remembering the need to throw my phone away for fear that we were being tracked, which I guess in hindsight we were. The difference being the ones chasing us were actually trying to get me back to my parents and not kill me. Turning back to the computer, I reviewed my day and could understand how the emotions of my experiences were received, causing me to cringe. It has been an intense day, but otherwise a great one. There's only one thing that would have made it better. "Oh, what is that?" she said with an emoji wearing a monocle. "You, here with me." There was a long pause, and I reread the line, regretting that I had sent it. I contemplated how to negate my blunder while the panic intensified as I watched the bubbles show and disappear multiple times. Immediately, I wished Marcus was here to help talk me off the edge. "I miss you too. The block seems too empty without you three here." I stared at the screen, wondering what an appropriate response would be. How had we left off? Were we girlfriend and boyfriend, or just friends that shared a pretty intense kiss when we parted ways? Her response didn't give me the feeling that we were an exclusive couple, although I seriously wished we were. Sighing, I watched as more bubbles appeared on the screen. "So, what was it like going back? Did anyone remember you?" she asked, breaking the silence and bringing my attention away from her and me and back to the most insane day I've ever had, which is saying a lot these days. "It was the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. The entire town came out and cheered for us like we were returning celebrities." This time, there was a silence that lingered on her side, and I wondered if I had hurt her feelings when I heard a new chime and a new screen opened. "Jace!" "Wait, are you talking to Izzy?" Marcus asked. "Yes." "Hold on, I'm pulling us into a group chat." Again, a chime rang, and a new window opened, asking if I would like to join the group chat with Enos 126 and Ilaria 424. Smiling, I accepted Marcus's invitation. "Oh man, you must have had a wild day. What's going on?" Marcus asked. Smiling, I reviewed the events of the day with them both, from the Dracaina at the rest stop to the hero's welcome, and of meeting my pack and the reaction from Alex. "I'm just throwing it out there. I think you should really avoid rest stops from here on out, or at least stay away from the back of the buildings," Marcus teased, causing me to remember the rest stop from our last adventure and the large animal that we had encountered. "Why do you think he was so cold to you?" Izzy asked. "I don't know. I guess you can't make everyone happy," I said. "It's weird to be so put off by someone you never met. Just be careful," Izzy warned. "Sounds like the rest of the town was very excited to have you back, though," Marcus added. "I didn't know how to act, so I just followed my parents, hoping to not make too much of a fool of myself." I paused a moment before sharing the next bit of information. "There's something else," I wrote, unsure how I was going to explain my father's vision. "Well, that's not ominous, especially with you not answering back right away," Marcus said. I smiled at his response before I took a deep breath and explained about having a similar connection with my father that I do with them. The difference being that I can actually see what he's thinking as well as hear him. Then I reviewed the graphic images my father had accidentally sent me and waited for their response. "Whoa, man. I don't know your aunt and uncle all that well, but from what I do, I cannot see them being that, He left the sentence open-ended. "Barbaric," Izzy finished his thought. "Something is missing in this. I just can't understand why they would be so hurtful," Izzy continued. "I keep thinking the same thing, but who else could have created the scene?" I asked. "Who were they?" Marcus asked. "They never found out." "Oh my God, that's horrible," Izzy added. There was a pause from both of them, and I wondered if I had divulged too much information until the window chimed again. "I don't know, Jace. It doesn't add up to me. If they wanted to be cruel, they wouldn't have led you back to your parents. They would have packed up and ran again. I think you need to ask your uncle when you see him again," Marcus said. "If I see him again," I thought. "Have you heard from him since Eobriaria?" Izzy asked. A pit welled up in my chest at the space where he would be. "No, he said that he was searching for Elishore and would keep me safe. I don't know what that means or when he will surface again." "Don't give up faith in him just yet," Izzy encouraged. "Try to get some rest. You had a very exciting day today, and I'm sure tomorrow will be just as eventful. I'll let Brian know what was going on. He's downstairs with Zoe," she continued. I looked over at the clock on my dresser. As though on cue, the fatigue finally ran its way through my body, causing me to yawn in response to her suggestion. "Thanks, guys," I replied. "Anytime, man. Maybe throw us a word or two when you're getting yourself into a stressful situation. You know, so we can prepare for it," Marcus suggested. I let out a small snort at his response before answering. "Sure." I watched as both green bulbs went gray next to my friends' names and knew they had signed off. The sense of being alone hit, and I wanted to snap my fingers and bring them here with me. To have the virtual reality duel Marcus and I had planned before everything went sideways. I wanted more time with Izzy, to maybe even go to school with her like a normal teenage couple. As I let out a sigh of exasperation, I closed the lid of my laptop and stared at the picture of my friends. With a sigh, I pushed away from my desk and toward my dresser. Opening the drawers and seeing my old clothes brought a smile to my face again. Grabbing an old beat-up shirt and flannel pants, I quickly changed before turning back to the bed to find Buddy rolled over on his back, encompassing most of it. Chuckling to myself, I started by gently nudging the 70-pound mass, before I resorted to physically shifting him lower on the bed to make room for myself. With only a slight turn to the head, Buddy allowed the movement before he plunged back to sleep. With enough room procured for myself, I snuggled into the sheets, enjoying the weight of my dog across my feet, which acted as an anchor in this new place, as I drifted off to sleep. Chapter 4. The Run. The next morning, I woke to a soft whimper coming from across the room. As I lifted my head, I searched for Buddy and found myself disoriented by the semi-familiar setup of the room. Locating the enormous mass of fur next to the window, I sat up trying to rub the sleep from my eyes. "What's up, big guy?" I asked as I moved to where he was standing. Below, I could see a multitude of bodies milling around like tiny ants collecting seeds for winter. But my focus landed on a group of teen boys making their way to our house, with Brent in the lead. "I wonder what's going on," I asked my silent companion, who only answered with a bemused glance. Chuckling, I rubbed Buddy's ear before I searched for something suitable to wear. By the time I made my way downstairs, the group of teens had amassed at my door and were in deep conversation with my father.
"I think that would be an excellent idea," my father said.
Not wanting to interrupt, I quickly turned the corner of the stairs, trying to make a quiet escape toward the kitchen when a voice from the doorway called out, causing me to return.
"Jace!"
The voice spoke with a slight hitch in it, as though taken by surprise. Stopping, I turned to see half a dozen sets of eyes fixed on me, causing the blood to rush to my cheeks. Shaking off the momentary embarrassment, I moved back to the door.
"Some of your pack would like to go for a run with you," my father announced.
"A run?" I asked.
"Yes, it's a way to bond with each other. We use the woods in front of this house for convenience. Everyone here knows them and can guide you," my father said.
"Are you coming too?" I asked as my heart rate picked up.
"I wasn't planning on it," he said as he watched me with some concern.
The thought of going for a run by myself with a group I had only met once left me wanting to run, but away from the situation. Staring at the collection of teens in the door, I could feel my stomach performing somersaults, which left me queasy. I had only shifted twice, and wasn't sure if I could do it again, let alone on my own. The moon had brought on my first shift, forcefully, with an unbelievable amount of pain. My second shift back to my human form was with the help of my father, and was far less stressful or painful. But I had never shifted by myself, and now he wanted me to go out alone and just know what to do. My father's eyes narrowed, leaving me feeling more like I was on display for the group.
"How about this? Let me get this boy fed first. Can you come back in about an hour?" my father asked the group of teens.
Confusion seemed to pan across each of their faces as their eyes darted between each other. Yeah, sure. What time would you like us?" Brent asked.
"It's only 8. Let's have you come back around 9:30, he suggested.
There was a shared glance between the group before Will nodded to my father.
"Wonderful. We'll see you then,"
my father answered. Waving to the group, he shut the door before turning to look at me.
"Why are you so afraid?"
he finally asked, causing me to flinch at his accusation. Smiling, he pointed to his head.
"There's nothing to be afraid of. Shifting is a natural process, and I know you will have no issues," he tried to reassure me.
I just thought... My words trailed off, unsure how to tell him I had hoped to shift the next time with him and not by myself. Flashes of my first shift in Eobriaria came to the forefront of my mind. The pain of my bones breaking, organs rotating, and hair tearing through the skin, as though it were happening right there, caused me to wince and step back.
"Ah,"
he said as he lifted his head and softened his features.
"Let's get you fed and then we can work on it in the back," he suggested.
Feeling a weight being lifted from my shoulders, I was grateful that he could hear my thoughts, and I would not have to flounder as I tried to explain myself. Grasping me around the shoulders, he guided me back to the dining room, where a small feast was being laid out by my mom. "I hope you're hungry," she said with a wide grin, as she placed another plate down. My stomach gurgled with anticipation from the wonderful aromas wafting off the table. "It smells amazing," I answered with a smile. "Pull up a seat and dig in," she said before turning to my dad. "Who is at the door?" she asked.
Some of the pack. They want to go for a run with Jace after breakfast.
"Oh, that's a wonderful idea," she started, until she looked at my face and frowned as she stopped mid-scoop into the eggs. "Is that not a wonderful idea?" she amended, searching my face for the right answer. I... Frustration hit as I tried to tell my mother about my newfound fear.
He's never shifted alone, and is unsure he can do it on his own.
Her face softened as she took in mine before turning to my dad.
I know. That's what we're going to do after he eats, he answered her unspoken suggestion with a smile.
After breakfast, Dad and I walked out to the back of the house near a clearing in the far corner. Feeling exposed, I looked around, fearing that anyone could see me and know that I was having trouble shifting on my own. The last thing I wanted was for this group to think that I needed the help of my daddy. As I scanned the perimeter, I noticed he had tucked us up tight into the tree line, where it would be difficult to see anything. Relief washed over me as I let out a small breath, and my shoulders relaxed.
"We're pretty well hidden over here,"
he started as he watched me intently. I took another cautious look around the area before returning my attention back to my father.
"I promise you, no one will see us. Are you ready?" he asked with a kink in his smile.
"I'm not sure," I said, remembering the fear and pain I experienced in Eobriaria. My father's smile vanished, replaced by a frown.
"You have a pack to help you this time, and I'm here as well. Between both, we will give you the strength you need."
There was a slight improvement in my anticipation, but still a soft sway in my abdomen, like I was standing on a cliff contemplating if the cord would be strong enough to catch me at the bottom.
"I hate that they forced you through your first change. The fear of the unknown led you to all the pain. When you shift this time, you'll see that it's not painful. Think about it. If it were painful, do you think any of those kids would want to do it?"
Understanding his point, the last bit of the swaying ceased as I stood taller. "What do I have to do?" I asked.
"First, if you like the outfit you're in, you're going to want to change out of it."
Looking down, I examined the gray button merino wool sweater and faded jeans, and decided that I appreciated the look too much to shred it in the change. I searched for a location to store my clothes before looking up and making eye contact with my father. Realizing that he was watching me, I felt all the blood rush to my cheeks. Seeing my deliberations, and likely listening to them in his own head, the crooked smile grew further with each passing thought.
"You're going to give yourself an aneurysm," he teased.
Stepping closer, he placed a hand on my shoulder, looking me in the eye. At that moment, I noticed something. When we had first seen each other a few weeks ago, my father was still taller than me, but I was now looking him in the eye. I had grown again.
"Seeing someone without clothes is a common sight in the creek. There are enough shifter communities here that you'll probably catch someone naked at some point. No one judges. If anything, it's a bonding point for all of us, because we understand the reason."
Releasing my shoulder, he stepped back before turning to look away, likely to give me some privacy. Staring at his back, I began removing my clothes, starting with my sweater and shoes. As I clasped the buttons on my jeans, hesitation ran through me.
"Oh, and you're not as tall as me,"
my father said, unexpectedly breaking my thought process. "What?"
"You're getting closer, but you're not quite the same height. Yet."
A smile crept across my face as I completely relaxed and removed the rest of my clothes, laying them neatly in a pile near the base of a large spruce. "Okay, now what?" I asked as I covered myself. Turning back to me, he only gave a quick glance at my hands, thankfully ignoring my posture and allowing me to feel as comfortable as I was going to in the current situation.
"Do you remember what I told you?"
he asked. His question brought my mind back to Eobriaria, and his guiding me back to my human form. "You said it was like falling, and that I just had to imagine the form I wanted."
"Exactly. I want you to try that."
I closed my eyes and tried to think of a wolf and its basic features, sensing my body tense as I did so. With each passing minute of nothingness, the frustration grew, leaving me wanting to run until my father touched my shoulder.
"You're thinking of a wolf, not of yourself as that wolf. You have experienced the change and know the difference. Remember the heightened sense of smell, the tension of your muscles in anticipation of a run, the wind rushing through your fur."
Nodding, I closed my eyes as I tried to remember my wolf.
"He's always there with you. The prickle on your neck when something is wrong, the desire to be out in the open air, your ability to run fast. That is all your wolf inside you longing to get out. Release him, my father whispered behind me. There was a warming sensation near the center of my chest that soon extended out and into my limbs, which was like the gentle sway of being on a paddle boat. Allowing the sensation to engulf me, the dropping sensation that my father had mentioned started, but it did not scare me this time. Throughout my body there was pulling and tugging as the warmth grew in intensity, before being drawn back toward my core. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was lower to the ground. Bending over, my father leaned closer, placing his head on mine. I knew you could do it. Behind me, there was an explosion of movement, and I spun to see Buddy barreling at me, snarling and barking. Stepping in front of me, my father raised his hand to my dog. Stop! Skidding on the grass, Buddy paced back and forth, whining as his eyes darted between me and my father. It's him, boy. Come and check, he said. Cautiously, he loped closer to me with his head lowered as he passed my father. Realizing the fear and uncertainty that Buddy must have been experiencing, I lowered my head while I continued to watch him. Stretching his head out, he sniffed the air before his head shot up and tilted wildly to the side, confusion obvious on his face. Moving closer, he sniffed more aggressively before his tail started wagging so violently it caused his whole rear end to sway. His excitement was contagious as he jumped around, lunging closer before running around me in circles. Mimicking his motions, I chased him around the clearing, listening to my father laughing at our antics. The only thing to stop me was an odd sound in the distance, like it was up close and far away at the same time. Stopping, I looked in the noise's direction, but saw nothing. Next to me, Buddy took another leap or two before he must have also picked up on the sound and turned in the same direction, ears perked and in a ready position. Following our lead, my father looked over his shoulder, where he raised his hand in greeting. Next to the clearing were the same group of teens from earlier, walking around the back of the house. A sense of dread as their seeing my need for my father's help to shift left me wanting to run away and hide. Next to me, Buddy must have picked up on my anxiety and was shifting uncomfortably and nuzzling into my side to calm me. Not wanting to upset him, I tried to settle my fears when my father's voice came through. I had to do this same thing with all of those boys. No one is judging you, he said in my head. Relaxing, I nodded in recognition of his message. Whoa, I think he's the biggest one out of all of us, David said. Definitely bigger than you, Brent said as he ribbed David. Where's Alex? My father asked. There was an uneasy exchange of glances as my father's face changed from entertainment to annoyance. He wanted to continue his perimeter watch, William said. Frowning, my father turned to look at me, where his face morphed into the same look of happiness as before. I think your pack is ready to go for their run. I'm going to head in with Buddy now. Not knowing what else to do, I nodded my head in understanding. Next to my father was a low whimper from Buddy, as he called him toward the house. A twinge of guilt ran through me as I watched my dog saunter toward my father, as he kept turning to look back at us, yearning to join in on the fun. He'll be back soon. Let him get acquainted with his new friends, my father said reassuringly as he patted him on the head. Seeming to understand what my dad was saying, his head perked up, and his tail started wagging, as he walked back to the house with no further complaints. He's a beautiful dog, Brent said. Most dogs are uneasy around us. I don't think I've ever heard of someone having one as a pet, Cody added. Unsure how else to communicate with them, I nodded. You met 1,000 people yesterday, and I'm sure you don't remember all of our names. Let us reintroduce ourselves, William said as he stepped forward, his light eyes bright against his mocha skin. My name is William Shepard, but most call me Will. Being 22, I head up this part of the group. Next to him, the other teens lined up ready for their introductions. This is Brent Miller, David Donovan, Cody Snyder, and Chris Middleton, Will added. Chris is the next oldest, although he's one of the newest members. Cody is 18 and has been here for years, and you and Brent are the same age. I nodded at his introductions. All right, let's get on with it then, Will said as he motioned to the other teens. Turning to look into the wooded area, I found my body was coming alive with anticipation of the upcoming run with my packmates. There was an energy running through me like a downed live wire jumping on the street. The need to run and experience the air rushing through my pelt, and the soft crinkle of the soil between my toes was such a foreign thought, yet felt as though going to see a long-lost friend. Behind me, I could pick up the patting of feet, and turned when someone nuzzled my neck. The wolf was a brindle color with white splashes that ran along his cheeks, making him appear to smile. Next to him was a larger wolf with a tawny-colored coat, and eyes so crystal blue that they nearly matched the sclera surrounding them.
The only thing to denote where the eye was looking was a thin black line and central pupil. Behind him was a wolf with a gray-black coat that appeared like a watercolor painting with beautiful swirls mixed within. The last two stayed closer to the back of the group. The first was a blue merle in tan color with yellow eyes, and the second was a red sable tricolor with green eyes. Within my head, I picked up a voice and looked around the group, until the wolf with the crystal eyes barked and stared at me. You likely lost track of who is who. I'm Will. Follow close to us so we don't get separated. If you need anything, let me know. Shocked by the voice, I stepped back, until I remembered my father telling me they can communicate with each other this way, and I wondered if it was all wolves or just him. I will, I answered. Turning to the wood line, Will seemed to determine the best course before taking off like a shot. Just as quickly, the other 4 wolves sprang into action, following the now faint blur of tawny color disappearing into the brush. Not wanting to get left behind, my legs tensed momentarily before releasing their kinetic energy, propelling me forward faster than I thought possible. As I ran, all of my senses seemed to heighten, and although I was moving with a tremendous speed, the world seemed to slow, allowing me to adjust my trajectory as needed. Relaxing into the stride, I reveled in the dirt's rough texture crunching between my paws before being kicked up behind me. Around me, I could make out the wonderful smells of apples from the orchards near Bear Country, mixed with the piney scent of the fir trees, while somewhere in the distance, the faint fragrance of a fireplace tickled the back of my nose, allowing me to bask in the aromas. The smallest movements of woodland creatures scurrying out of our way were perceptible to me, as I experienced with a near reverence my wolf's ability to perceive it. In that moment, my love for my other half grew exponentially, allowing me to form a tightly bonded kindredship with this beast that has been hidden away deep within. It fascinated me that this part of me had been there all along, silently waiting for me to discover him. But there was also a sense of guilt at how lonely the existence must have been while he waited for me to recognize him. Coming up next to me, I noted 2 wolves flanking me on either side, which left me wondering their intentions. On my left was the darker-colored wolf with the gray-black fur, while the red-toned wolf with green eyes was on my right. I shifted my attention back and forth between the two as my fear intensified. Brent is on your left and David's on your right. They're looking to play. I heard Will's voice, causing me to stop as I looked for him. Why can I only hear your voice? I asked. Because you haven't opened your mind enough to accept them in, he responded. How do I do that? First, you need to trust them. Next, imagine the connection and you'll hear them. Looking at the other wolves, I could see the confusion in their eyes, as they likely were trying to determine what had caused our stop. As I took each of them in, I could see concern in their faces as they paced, anxiously watching me. Next to me, Brent came close to me, brushing his snout against my shoulder, causing me to look at him. As I did, it was as though a blockade had shattered, allowing me the access that I had been missing before. Can you hear me yet? He asked cautiously. Yes, I can, I said with relief in my tone. Brent's head perked up as his tail began swaying gently. What about the other guys? He asked. Looking at each of the other wolves, I had a similar reaction occur, and the once silent forest was now abuzz with the voices of my packmates. The exhilaration of the moment left me bounding with energy as I jumped energetically around the area we had stopped in. Seeing my reaction, the 5 other wolves joined in the merriment, leaving us playfully batting and nipping at each other before running in various directions. Like a werewolf game of tag. How adventurous are you feeling? Cody asked. Slowing my bounce, I glanced across the group, trying to determine what his version of adventurous was. You're definitely the biggest one here, Brent started. Hey, speak for yourself, David said as he playfully nipped at Brent, causing him to jump out of the way. Rolling his eyes, Brent continued his original thought. As I was saying, you seem to be the biggest, but are you the fastest? A rush ran through me as I anticipated our test of skills. The thrill seemed to run through my packmates as well, as they shifted back and forth, occasionally whining. I'm game. How do you want to figure it out? I answered. The rules are simple. First one to the twisted oak in the center of the forest and back wins, Will said. Where's this tree? I asked. It's impossible to miss. In the center of the woods, you'll see a small clearing just before the tree is visible, all gnarly and twisted, like the ground was trying to swallow it while it tried to get away, Cody said in a spooky tone. I cringed at the description, remembering briefly the small child my father had seen, sending a shiver down my spine. You okay? It's like you just saw a ghost, Brent said as he nudged my side. Nah, I'm good. It was just a great description, I lied. Are you all ready? Will asked. There was a thrill that ran through me, almost as though an electric current had jumped to each of us, connecting our bodies and expectations. Will walked in front of us and drew a line across the dirt, creating a makeshift starting line. Seeing it, we all fell in order as we waited for our cue to run. Coming to stand next to me, Will turned to look left, then right, apparently checking that we were all fairly set up. Dropping into the wolves' equivalent of a runner's stance, I followed his lead, as did the rest of the group. With another deep breath, I heard his voice loud and booming in my head. Go! Without thinking, I shot off in the direction Will had pointed us, feeling the dirt kick up around me as I darted through the tree line and over the small brush. Although I wasn't looking at my pack mates, I could feel them with me and around me, as though there was a magical tether connecting us while we ran. Although we had run quite a distance into the woods, it felt like only a minute or two before I noticed the thicket lessening, until it had completely cleared, leaving the deformed tree visible. Cody's description had been fairly accurate, as the roots seemed to climb up and around the base of the tree, tangling within it, pulling on it as the trees seemed to wrestle free of its bonds. Above this area, the tree was full of life, as the leaves were brilliant shades of golds and reds, which were accented by a halo of warm rays from the sun, shining into its small enclosure from above. The appearance of the tree was so mystifying that I felt myself slowing to take in its appearance when I noticed David's muted red wolf rush past me and around the tree. Realizing that I was going to lose if I didn't start moving, I decided I would come back to visit this tree later. Dropping lower to increase my speed, I raced toward my target. As I came closer, its size seemed to grow exponentially, leaving me feeling dwarfed by its grandeur. Rounding its base, there was a sickening sensation, as I felt an almost tugging sensation on my paws, like I was trying to run across a pasty material. Panic rose, as the fear of being caught by whatever had ensnared this tree sent me sprinting as fast as I could away from it, without so much as a glance backward. Feeling my fear slowing, I looked up to locate my packmates, realizing that I should have reached the finish line by now. Slowing my pace, I searched the area and could neither see nor feel the same attachment I had when the race started. Coming to a stop, I sniffed the air, attempting to pick up the scent of the others, while a wave of uneasiness filled me. Crap, I chastised myself. I remembered Will with his hypnotic eyes, hoping I had not strayed so far that he could not hear me. Will, I'm not sure where I am, and I don't know how to get back to the house. I waited, hoping to receive some sort of response. When none came, I contemplated contacting my father, when I hesitated. Since finding me, he'd already had to save me multiple times, and I didn't want this to be another one. You can do this, Jace. Just figure out where you came from, I told myself. Turning back in the direction I had just come from, I tried to look for the ill-formed tree, but could no longer see it. A wave of confusion set in as I tried to remember if I had made the complete turn around the tree or not, as I started searching the wooded area, trying to find something recognizable. Maybe I should call on my dad. It has to be better than doing nothing, I thought. Turning inward, I searched for the thick goldenrod bond that represented him, but where it should have been it was now missing. A wave of fear crashed into me, as I then searched for any of my bonds, wondering if the tree's base had removed them from me as I ran past. Dropping back, I looked around the area that I found myself in, again wondering if I could hear or see anything that would direct me back to my home. Taking a deep breath, I had another thought. Although I had never heard of anyone doing it, I wondered whether I could talk directly with my wolf, hoping his intuition would be better than mine. As I considered my new option, I tried to determine just how I would even contact him if I wanted to. Deciding that it was likely the same as with everyone else, I tried to imagine my wolf's form as a being that was separate from me. As I closed my eyes, I stared at an alternative me, as though I was seeing myself from an outside perspective. It was like I was looking in a mirror, but this other human version of me came across as a completely separate entity, like there were two of me present. I watched in fascination as the other version of myself reshifted effortlessly into our wolf form. Seeing this other part of me was amazing, as I had never actually seen my wolf and reveled in its appearance. He was a beautiful mixture of tans, creams, grays, and blacks that streaked lengthwise across the body, with a snow-white snout and paws. The face seemed to have streaks of gray and black angled toward the back, like the wind was blowing the color back from the face. In the center of two black streaks, equidistant on the face, was a pair of crystal blue eyes that nearly matched my own. I reached out my hand to touch my other half, and watched in awe as it did not move, except to watch my hand as it crept closer. Making contact, I reveled in the fur's softness as it tickled between my fingers, leaving an electric sensation in its wake, like a connection formed that had not been there before. Standing, I looked at my inner beast. I know we've never spoken before, and I'm not even sure that you can, but do you know where we are or how to get back? Again I waited, feeling foolish for thinking I could communicate with my wolf, when I perceived a whisper. Stopping all movement, I watched the wolf, trying to perceive if it was him speaking to me. I can't hear you. What are you saying? With my shoulders relaxed, I listened closer when the voice came again, this time louder. As the sweet velvety male voice came through, there was a surprising sensation in the back of my throat as the sour taste of bile crept up, while my heart beat erratically.
Calm yourself.
The voice spoke as I stared.
You need to ready yourself. The boy wolf is coming,
the voice continued. Are you talking to me? What boy wolf are you talking about? The wolf nodded as he watched me with intense eyes.
You asked for me, and I am here. We have always been together, although I could not join you in the forefront of your mind until you were ready.
What do you mean?
We were born together and traveled the path of life as one. When you felt alone, I was with you, trying to comfort you as best I could.
Ice ran through my veins as I listened. How do I know you're telling me the truth? The voice was silent as my wolf dropped his head, seeming to think of a suitable response.
You had a box under your bed, with trinkets from your old life.
You would pull it out when you felt the most alone. On the top of the box was a wolf howling at the moon.
You believed it was there to guard your most important treasures.
But anyone could have known about that, I countered. I cautiously watched as I waited to see what it would tell me next.
You carry the guilt of Encora's death.
My heart froze at his words, knowing it was true, and that no one knew of that fact, not even Uncle Roman. Who are you?
You can call me Christian, the part of you that remembers the early years that your human brain cannot. We are two halves in one whole.
I stood in silence with an unfamiliar sensation, as though a puzzle piece was being plopped into place that I was not aware had been missing. The wolf swung his head to my left as he shifted into a defensive position, emitting a low growl as he bared his teeth.
Jace, the angry teen is coming now. You need to prepare yourself.
Christian warned more urgently. What angry teen?
The one that stayed out on patrol. He's coming here now at a fast pace and gaining on you.
My wolf turned on me and growled, causing me to step back away from him.
You need to wake up,
he said as he lunged at me, causing me to fall back. I had expected a contact of extreme force, but it was more like the melding effect of two bodies, as though he had rejoined me again. Opening my eyes, the fear of his warning rushed through me in waves, as I frantically tried to sense the direction Alex was coming from. Where is he?
Behind you now,
Christian bellowed as I spun in time to see the gray mass lunging at me, with eyes so dark they appeared like obsidian orbs. Dodging left at the last second, I could feel the air swirl past my coat. Not understanding the reasoning behind the attack, I rebounded, trying to keep him in my sights. Are there any others about to attack? I asked Christian.
Not that I can sense.
Alex was crouched low in front of me, teeth bared with a low and menacing growl, emanating from deep within his chest. Assuming a similar posture, I followed his movements in what appeared to be a slow waltz to an unheard melody. With each step, I searched for signs of the pack I had started my morning with, praying they would come to my aid. But upon seeing no one, my blood ran cold, wondering if they had set me up. What would they tell my parents? Would they believe the story?
You cannot think about that now. Focus on what is in front of you,
Christian demanded. Simultaneously, Alex shifted to perk an ear up, as though he had also just received Christian's warning to me. Just as quickly, he dropped lower and burst forward. Again, everything seemed to move in slow motion, as I watched his hind legs uncoil and launch the weight of his body at me. With his paws clearing the ground, Alex pulled his mouth open wider, exposing more of his teeth, his intent of grabbing a meaty section obvious. Dropping lower, I catapulted my entire force at the wolf, baring my teeth before we collided in midair, leaving us as a whirl of teeth, fur, and claws. The goal was apparent: fight to cause the most damage, up to and including the death of our opponent. The realization was like a sudden blow, and I wondered what had brought us to this point. I had never given him a reason to attack me. For that matter, I had never even spoken to him. Every thought kept leading back to the same question. Why? Propped up on our hind legs, we continued our assault on each other, neither willing to back down. To our left, I heard the faint rumble on the turf and turned to see what had caused the noise when a searing pain burst in my neck, causing me to yowl. With Alex now firmly attached to my neck, I fought for my life, trying desperately to get him to release me by bucking. "Christian, help!" I cried out in my head, hoping my wolf's instinct would fare better in saving us. To my dismay, there was no response, nor any internal cue to alert me that my wolf had taken over. As the world swayed around me, I stopped fighting, and Alex's grip on me loosened. Knowing that I stood no chance against his wolf, I continued to allow myself to drop, which caused Alex to release me entirely. As my body contacted the ground, I tried to breathe, only to be overwhelmed by a warm copper taste that rushed into my mouth. Struggling to keep my eyes open, I glanced up to see Alex standing over me with my blood dripping from his mouth and running down his chest. Under better circumstances, I may have been afraid, but the blood loss was winning out, leaving me too tired to care. As the weight of my eyes grew too much to bear, I saw a dark shadow fly over top of me, colliding with Alex and sending him hurtling backwards against a nearby tree. I opened my eyes once more to see a gray and tan wolf with a black stripe running down its back, which culminated in a large black spot on the tip of his tail. Knowing that my father was there, I allowed myself to close my eyes. Chapter 5. The Bite. In the distance I could make out voices, but struggled to understand what was being said. Not wanting to alert them to my being awake, I just lay there. "What possessed you to attack him?" my father demanded. "I didn't realize who he was. He was a stranger and I—" Alex's words fell flat. "He was a stranger. You knew there was a new wolf in the creek, specifically my son, and you viciously attacked him, without even attempting to determine who he was or if he belonged," my father spat out. There was a pregnant pause, and I contemplated moving when I heard a loud bang, like someone slamming a fist on wood. Not wanting to be a part of whatever that was, I continued my silent vigil. "And where were you?" my father fumed to another person who must have been in the room. "We tried to keep up with him. He's exceptionally fast," Will tried to explain. Guilt ran through me as I listened to my father turn on him with as much acidity in his tone, remembering that all of this had started because of a game. "He is a Nova and needs guidance and close monitoring. If he was speeding up, you should have slowed him down. What if it had not been Alex that attacked him?" The pacing in the room quickened before it stopped short. "And you, attacking another wolf, unprovoked!" my father shouted. "How do you know it was unprovoked?" Alex asked. "Are you saying otherwise? Tread lightly with your answer," my father dared him. "I didn't say that, but you weren't there to see it." "I have other ways of knowing what is happening in and around the creek," he cryptically answered. I understood how he was aware of this information, but wondered why he was keeping it a secret. How much had he seen of my encounter in the woods? "Deegan, show them out. I need to attend to my son." "Deegan is here too?" I mentally moaned, wondering how many people were now in this room. Listening to my father reprimand them while I lay here like a dead fish left my stomach feeling like it was being used for a trampoline. As the door closed, I heard my father sigh heavily before the couch cushion shifted near my hip. "You can open your eyes now," he said. Cautiously, I opened them to meet his, deep in blue, staring back at me with concern creasing their corners. Touching the side of my neck, I felt a thick bandage and looked at his neck where I saw its twin. A mixture of anger and frustration ran through me as I released my neck and reached out. Seeing my hand approach, he pulled back and lifted his hand to block mine. "It was necessary. You were losing blood too quickly. He went for your neck." His voice faded on the last words as he turned his attention to some distant object on the floor. "He didn't know who I was. I heard him say it." I tried to help. His eyes met mine as he softened his features. "We have new wolves come and go all the time. His job is to bring them to me for questioning if he was not aware of them. Alex was aware of you, and that you were out for a run in the woods today. There was no excuse." His words left me grateful I was lying down, as the room seemed to sway below me. I also wondered what had provoked the attack, as I was just standing there, trying to figure out which way to head back home. But I was also talking to Christian. What did that look like to someone seeing it from a distance? Could that have been what caused him to attack? Standing, my father began pacing the room, periodically looking back at me. Although I'd never been in the principal's office before, I imagined this is what it would feel like. "Why did you run ahead of the group?" he asked in a calm tone, which was more unnerving compared to his previous reaction. "I didn't plan on it. I was just running and then turned to realize no one was near me anymore." His eyes narrowed as he stared at me, and I wondered if he was trying to reach into my mind and pull out the answer. As I sat up, my neck felt as though someone had just branded me with a hot poker, and I sucked in a deep breath as I dropped my head again. "Please, don't move. You're still hurt," he said as he reached forward. "I hear werewolves heal up pretty quick," I teased. A smile brushed the corner of his mouth. "Yes, but you still need to give yourself time to heal. It's not instantaneous, and larger wounds can still be fatal. You're not infallible." His eyes seemed to darken at the last part of his statement, the warning resonating too close to home for him to bear. "I'm fine. My back is just locking up and would be more comfortable sitting," I lied. Eyeing me warily, he stood up to allow me more room to adjust myself. Swinging my legs off the couch, I moved cautiously, trying to keep my reaction to the pain to a minimum. Finding a more comfortable position, I glanced up and gave him a toothy smile, which caused him to chuckle before he returned to sit next to me. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. "Like I said, we were running. It was actually a race. I saw David take off ahead of me and I sped up to pass him. By the time I realized I wasn't with them anymore, I no longer knew where I was. It was when I was trying to get my bearings that he jumped me." My father's lips pursed as he turned to the fireplace. "For what it's worth, I totally get why you have him on patrol," I teased, trying to lighten my father's mood. Again, he chuckled as he dropped his head. "It was you that hit into him, wasn't it?" I asked. With his head still lowered, he nodded, but appeared to be almost mourning the fact that he had. "How did you know where I was? I didn't call out to you. I didn't have time to." Meeting my eyes, he cupped the back of my head and drew our foreheads close together before sitting back. "As the alpha, I'm aware of most things that go on. Being your father, my senses are even more on guard." He started. "I wasn't sure what was happening, but knew there was something wrong and that I needed to get there fast. Deegan and I were in the clearing where I had left you when we both sensed it." "What did you feel?" "A wrongness, like when you're watching a movie and they're playing a touching song to some gruesome scene playing out. It sent a chill up my spine, and when Deegan picked up on it as well, we both ran for the forest." "I'm sure you've felt it with your friends as well," he suggested. I thought back and shook my head. "Actually, they seem to pick up on what's happening with me, because I'm the one always running into trouble," I chortled. That thought sent my blood running cold, as I realized what my friends must have experienced. I shot up off the couch before grabbing at my head, feeling the room sway violently. "Slow down," he said as he grabbed onto my arms to steady me. "You're right. They're going to need to hear that you're okay. But let me help you upstairs," he said, giving me a warning eye not to argue with him. As we turned to head upstairs, I stopped at the bottom and turned to him. "Hey, Dad, can I get a cell phone? I kinda killed mine when I thought Deegan was trying to kill me." He chuckled. "Yes, I think we can arrange it." Smiling, I made my way up the stairs with Buddy close behind. Entering my room, I turned to look at my laptop and decided this would need a more personal touch. "I'm going to lie down," I said to my dad as he guided me over and eased me back onto my bed. "Are you okay? Do you need me to reposition you?" he asked. "No, I'm good. Thank you for everything," I said with a smile. "It's what fathers do," he said with a smile as he turned to leave the room. Once alone, I turned inward as I searched for the tethers of my friends and pulled on them, hoping they wouldn't be too worried. "Jace, oh my God, what the hell happened up there?" Brian's voice came through. A smile crossed my face as I imagined the large teen concerned with my welfare. "Are you okay? I was so scared," Izzy chimed in. "Dude, we're all sporting some wicked marks on our necks, and people are looking at us like we're part of some weird cult," Marcus added. Ice ran through me at Marcus's last revelation. "What do you mean you have a mark?" I asked. "At first, it felt like I was going to have a panic attack, and then there was this intense pain in my neck. When I went to look, there were 4 puncture wounds." "Dude, were you bitten by a vampire?" Marcus asked. "All of you have it?" I asked. "Oh yeah, all of us. Some of us even have a fat lip to go with it," Ryan said. "But I wasn't hit in the face.
No, but Brian was when Zoe saw the marks, Izzy answered with a laugh.
Oh man, Brian, I'm sorry.
It's okay, but I had to tell her what was going on. I'm not sure if she's more pissed that I have this weird bond with you three that I didn't tell her sooner, or that she's not part of it too.
Are you guys okay? Your necks, I mean?
It hurt like hell. I thought my neck was about to be ripped open. Who'd you piss off this time? Brian accused.
One of the team leaders here, but I don't know why he has it out for me. My dad had to step in, otherwise... There was a momentary pause, as my unspoken words seemed to linger between us.
Whoa, is the other guy still in one piece?
Marcus teased, trying to break up the mood.
Yeah, he's fine. Bruised ego, but otherwise not hurt. My dad had to absorb some of the injury to help me. He's also wearing a bandage.
Jace, I don't like this. I thought you would be safe there, Izzy said.
I am safe. I just have to watch myself around Alex. Now that I know what his wolf looks like, I'll be better able to ward off another attack.
Holy hell. This is a wolf bite? Brian asked.
Yeah, why? I mean, it was painful, but not that big. I would have thought a wolf would have been able to literally bite your head off, he continued. Laughing, I imagined Brian's 6'3" frame making grand gestures with his arms. I guess it's not that big because I was also in my wolf's form when he did it. There was a silence as everyone seemed to process the implications of the day's events.
So, what does this mean? We used to only pick up on your emotions, but now we can get hurt when you are? Izzy asked.
That was actually Alyssa's question. She's a bit freaked out right now, Brian added. I felt myself gulp.
Both your sisters know?
You've not known the Lewis sisters that long. If one knows something, it's not long before all three know it. I told Zoe, so she immediately called Alyssa to tell her, Brian answered apologetically.
There has to be something to keep this from happening. I don't think my heart can take it. I feel like a sitting duck waiting to get shot, except the gun is 7 states away and I don't know when the trigger will be pulled, Marcus said. I tried to imagine things from their point of view and felt the bile rise. These are my friends, and they're suffering because of that friendship. Did you mention it to your aunt? I asked Marcus. God, no. She's already hot to trot over the connection we have as it is. Can you talk with your mom? I'm sure there has to be a way to separate us. It's not a strong Darwinian trait. Your leader gets taken out and the entire group drops dead from the same affliction, Izzy added. The mention of my mom made me realize she'd not been in the house when I woke up, and wondered where she could be. Something this serious would have her racing back to the house. I'm going to talk to her now. I promise to keep myself safe until I know how to break this part of the connection. No, you need to promise to keep yourself safe indefinitely, Izzy amended. Imagining her small frame standing with a hand on her hip brought a smile to my face. Okay, indefinitely. Better, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice.
Out of curiosity, is there any way you can make someone an honorary member of our club and let them listen in? Brian asked.
Zoe? I asked with a slight chuckle.
It would make things so much easier for me.
I'm not sure how I did it with you guys, let alone someone else, but I can ask my mom. Downstairs, the door slammed, and I heard frantic movement followed by my father's deep voice, in an attempt at a calming tone. Guys, I have to go. My mom just got home and is about to come up here. Think about what we said, Izzy urged. I will. Allowing myself to pull back into the present, I tried to sit up so as to not frighten my mother any further. I'm not sure what I looked like when I'm talking with my friends, but lying on the bed with my eyes closed and not moving is likely not the image she was looking to come in to find. Shifting on the bed, I tried to ignore the burning sensation in my neck and decided moving over to Uncle Roman's chair would be more comfortable and less traumatic for her. Repositioning myself, I tried to appear as casual as possible as the loud thuds coming from the stairs increased, with my father's muffled voice pleading close behind. In front of me, Buddy had lifted his head and was watching the door with his ears perked and head tilted, waiting to see what came through. The door swung wide. My mother's eyes wildly scanned the room until she landed on me and let out a noise somewhere between a gasp and a sigh. Running to my side, she quickly assessed my neck, then began turning my arms and legs over until I felt like a rotisserie chicken. What happened? She seethed through clenched teeth, which caused me to take pause. It had only been a few weeks, but I had never seen my mother react like this. I stared up at my father, whose brows knitted tightly while he stood behind her, seeming to judge what he should do or say next. It was a case of mistaken identity, I said, trying to calm her. Mistaken identity, she spat out. Gulping, I looked back to my father for guidance, and only received a slight shrug with wide eyes. Reaching forward, she touched the bandaging on my neck. The slight shift of the material against the raw skin below caused me to wince, and her face flushed. Delicately, she peeled the bandage back and her eyes widened before she returned it to its original position. Turning to my father, she stood on her toes to reach up and remove the twin bandage on his neck, and gasped at its sight. "Luca, this is as bad as his. Was it shared with Deegan as well?" His eyes dropped, and for the first time, my father seemed more like a young child being reprimanded by his mother. My mother eyed him warily, before her eyes widened. "Gavin, too?" she asked in a strained whisper. "I hope there were some serious ramifications for his actions. This was a death blow. Alex tried to kill our son." Her words hung heavy in the air, and I felt the breath being drawn out of me as I wondered again what had triggered his reaction. "My love," my father whispered as he nodded in my direction. Turning, my mother's face blanched as she dropped next to me, grasping my hand. "Are you in pain? Is there anything I can do?" she asked. Thinking back to my friends, I wondered if now would be an ideal time to mention that Alex's one bite had actually taken out 7 people, not just me. She seemed to be barely hanging on, and I decided that mentioning my friends being injured was likely not the best idea. Behind my mother, I saw my father's face slacken, so he must have also picked up my previous thought. "I'm okay. It's already feeling much better," I lied. Narrowing her eyes, she stared at my neck wordlessly. "Mom, you're freaking me out a bit. What are you thinking?" I finally asked. "You healed your friends and your father. You had to get the ability from one of us. I want to try," she said with concern etched deep into her features. Remembering the fear and despair I felt at seeing my friends scared and hurt, and not being able to help came rushing back as I looked in her face. Wanting to ease her pain, I nodded. "So, I just imagine what I think you need," she asked. "Yes, I'm not sure what I'm asking or where it's coming from, but that's what my intention is when I've done it." My mother squeezed my hand tighter as she closed her eyes. Initially, there was nothing, but then there was a small warmth that I noticed in my hand. I stared in amazement, as she seemed to glow a pale pink, like she was being illuminated with a light from behind or within her. Around us, there was a gentle breeze blowing through the room, which caused my father to shift uneasily. But although the physical display in front of me was impressive, there was no difference in my neck. Opening her eyes, she pulled the bandage down and looked dejected when she saw the wound still present and angry as ever. "I really hope that would have helped." "It's okay, Mom. I will heal, but it will just take a few days," I tried to reassure her. Concern creased her face as she stared at mine. "It is our job to protect you. That was why we brought you here." "You are protecting me," I tried to stress. "There are far greater threats out there. Now that Alex knows who I am and what I look like in both forms, this should never happen again," I continued. My mom eyed me dubiously before turning on my dad. "You never answered me. What are you doing about Alex?" "Maybe we can discuss it later," he suggested as he motioned to me, making me feel a bit like an outsider. "No, I think he deserves to hear the fate of the one that literally tried to rip his throat out." My father dropped his head in resignation before meeting her eyes. "I don't know yet." "You don't know yet? What is there not to know?" "He's still a kid and—" "He's 18, and his actions are not that of a child," my mother interjected as she stood to meet him face to face. "You were very quick to throw Deegan out, but now you show reserve," she spat, causing him to wince and recoil back from her. I stared at them in bewilderment and met my father's eyes before he looked back at my mom. "I was foolish in my thinking then, and you helped me to understand the need for compassion, which is what I'm trying to do now. If I throw out every wolf for fights, I wouldn't have a pack." "Luca, this wasn't a fight. This was an assault intending to kill. There's a difference." "My love, please. I know, because I was there for both events. This one is different. Alex truly believes he saw something that was a danger to the pack. I need to figure out what that was." My stomach lurched as my breath caught. The only things in that area of the forest were Alex and me. Was my dad having second thoughts about me? Did he no longer trust me? My world seemed to spin wildly off its axis, and I was having trouble finding something to anchor myself onto when I felt firm hands grasp my shoulders, forcing me to look into their owner's face. "I trust you with every fiber of my being, but I have known Alex since he was a very young boy and could not see him doing what he did without a powerful reason. I need to figure out what that was before I do something irreparable." Searching his eyes, I could see the emotional tug of war being played out in his head. Behind him, my mother turned away from us and absently petted Buddy, who was sitting upright, anxiously watching the argument. She turned away and I heard her sniffle. My father's head spun to look at her before he pulled her close and wrapped his arms around her, lifting her face to his. Gently, he wiped away the tears with his thumbs. "This is my heart in this room, and I will do everything I can to protect it. Please, trust me." She stared at him for an extended period before she nodded. Leaning down, he kissed the top of her head before pulling her into a tight hug. "I love you, Callista Volk, and I love our son no matter what." Without turning, he reached his right arm out to me. I stood and walked into their embrace, enjoying a sense of peace at those simple words. Close to my mother, I could feel the stutter of breath from her tears before she took in a deep breath and let it out. "I love you, Luca Volk, and I love our son, no matter what."